All right, I got to clarify a couple of things about this, right? This video, I've been seeing it, and I got to make sure it's mentioned. First off, Aggro messed up the screws on the side of the chair, and that's why it took so long in that one segment where we're trying to get the back attached. He couldn't get his side done, so I had to do both. And Hindu pulled me out. I didn't just leave them because I was tired of building the chair. I swear I got pulled out to have a conversation for that reason. It's just unfortunate timing because I just kind of abandoned you. But luckily, I'm still here and still enjoying my Maxnomic chair. You can too. Make sure you go and pick those up because, let's face it, I've spent the last year sitting around a whole ton, and I'm really enjoying the fact that I'm backed by this. I'm also really enjoying the fact that today I'm backed by Mifflin, who won't be leaving me in the middle of it to go have a conversation with Hindu Man, I don't think, at any point here on the desk as we get to the Bolts versus the Dragons. I don't know, if Hindu comes in and disrupts his own flow, like, he's the one who makes the schedules for us, man. If he disrupts the flow of the desk, that's on him. But I'm pretty excited for this one. It feels really, really good moving forward. And I really am excited to see, like, the Dragons are on a 4-set win streak. I don't think they've lost a game yet. And the Bolts are on the, well, pretty much a 3-game win streak. I think the last time they lost was to the Leviathan, so there's a lot of question marks that I think come around them. When we look towards the Bolts and specifically what they're going to be doing today, again, taking on the Dragons, we look at the schedule real quick just to see how this week's going to lay out. 1-2-0 already. They've got a difficult week ahead of them. I mean, it's not easy to say, hey, guess what? Our first game on Friday is versus the Jade Dragons. They then have to say, oh, well, by the way, we're playing against Sunday versus the Kings. This is the conversation we had a little bit there earlier for Waiting Room. But looking at the Bolts specifically and the way things are being tackled for this, the conversation and the question marks are you just beating, the Titans, the Warriors, the Valkyries, or are you able to come in and take on the Leviathans, the Kings, the Dragons, right? One half of the league versus the other, and where exactly they stand. Because right now, if I remember correctly on the standings, they're number 3, Mifflin. Where do you see the Bolts at least falling for this one? Are they going to give the Dragons and the Kings a little bit later this week some trouble?
Gore, I've been told many a time to not speak candidly about the power rankings of these teams, but you know what? I gotta say it, I cannot contain myself any longer. If I had to realistically predict where the Olympus Bolts are going to fall towards the end of this season, I think it's going to be solidly in that 4th, potentially even 5th seed if the Tartarus Titans can get their feet under them like they did earlier today. Look, the Bolts so far as I'm concerned, have only truly been tested once so far inside of the league, and that was up against the Leviathans, and they lost to the Leviathans. So this week in particular is going to be a fantastic heat check for them. If they're able to win out cleanly here, I'll just have to eat my words.
So the Dragons, I guess, and the Kings get to change their emblem to a thermometer this week just to, again, the heat check that comes through, figure out whether or not they're going to be very warm. And that's kind of been the conversation with the Bolts, right? We lean into these guys, and the reason is because it's been consistency, I guess, is the issue, right? That's what we talked about all last year. This year, after the performance they had at Worlds, we were like, man, this could be a really hot team. And then the first couple of weeks weren't exactly that, right? A little bit of even. I think they beat the Scarabs, lost to the Leviathans, something like that. And so a little bit of shaky areas for them. And Lasmer's kind of the one that everyone keeps their eye on, depending on how he plays, especially in this set. It could dictate everything for the Bolts.
Yeah, it felt like in Season 7, Lazra, his signature move was that duo lane gank at 2 minutes. Nowadays, the signature move is the exact same thing, but on the opposite side of the map. Lazra likes to get involved at that 2-minute mark, and then we largely see him kind of rest on his laurels, get his farm behind him for the next couple of levels. Maybe around 6, 7 in the game, he'll start to get re-involved. So I think whether or not Lazra's first gank of the game hits pay dirt is going to be very indicative of how his game is going to go in general.
You know, that last highlight, that's Lasper getting the kill, but that play was like partially, mostly kind of made by Jake there. Like, Zap's almost out of that engagement until that Sobek comes through. But that, I think, showcases how well they work together, a very important factor. Again, if you watch the video that came out later and some of these breaks, you probably know a little more of the backstory for how this team formed. It was not as simple as, well, Variety left, so we got to replace him. There was a lot of little moving parts for the Bolts to become the Bolts. But luckily, they do still have all of that years-long experience with each other now, and it seems to be paying off a little bit. But let's shift the perspective over a little bit to their opponents here. The Dragons, again, 8 games played, 8 games won, 4 sets played. Yeah, guess what? 4 sets won. They haven't lost a single match just yet. And you have to look at what Lasper is going up against, which is Sam, who has such a versatile style of play and jungles. I mean, it's very reminiscent of what we talk about adapting at his peak.
Yeah, Sam for Soccer is, for my money, one of the best, if not the best, to have ever done it consistently. Season 7 was the year of Sam for Soccer. In Season 8, he has not slowed down whatsoever. He's played, like 7 gods out of his 8 games, just a different one every single time, and he makes them all look equally strong. This guy is an absolute force to be reckoned with out of the jungle, but it's not just the Sam for Soccer show, is it? This is a team of 5 win conditions. You've got potentially best in slot solo laner, potentially best in slot mid laner, one of the strongest duo lanes to have ever done it as well. These guys on the Jade Dragons, I'm not sure they're capable of bleeding, man. I mean, this is some real Highlander level stuff. It's wild what they're able to accomplish on the battleground.
And I'm excited just to be able to watch him. Again, the way that this team works together, it's got, like, when I watch the Kings, things are very interesting because I didn't expect a lot of them, and they're surprising me every step of the way. I like their shot calling. When I watch the Dragons, everyone kind of knew this was going to be a team that came together and looked really good. I mean, last year, what was it? You know, you get the new jungler, quote unquote new jungler, who was just a world's MVP that had won. You pick him up. Things look really good for them all last year, literally until the semifinals. And then this year you just add a maybe more sustainable mid laner, at least something that feels a little bit more comfortable in the mid lane in Heroine. So it's a team that I think is going to be looking really good. And also, I have to agree with you. You know it's good for your highlight reel when every single clip is a different god. Of course, we happen to have Sam for Soccer here live right now. And I'm excited to be able to talk to you because I think this is going to be a very fun set to watch. I guess first and foremost, I'm going to throw the Izun out there. You guys have been on a tear. Are you worried about the Bolts, or do you think you're coming into this with the same level-headed you've had the last few sets?
I mean, the Bolts are definitely like a good team. I consider them like one of the better teams for sure in the league, but I don't know if we're too worried. Our biggest worry was Max had like some internet issues, so he had to drive to his friend's house. I think he like got there like maybe 5 or 10 minutes ago, so just in time, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, as long as we're playing with full roster, that's good, you know.
Well, thank you to the Valkyries for being able to hold out long enough for Panda Cat to get to his friend's house. Look, I'm going to go ahead and ask you now, Sam. I want to ask you wholeheartedly, who do you consider to be one of the largest threats inside of the league, outside of your own team?
I'd probably say the Leviathans, in my opinion, but outside of, if not them, maybe the Kings are next in line, and then probably I'd put the Bullets, like that'd be my order at the moment, but
okay.
Yeah, it's probably Leviathans and Kings.
Now, this is absolutely crucial question. Yesterday, I happened to see FineOK mentioning on Twitter that he's going to be picking some maybe weirder gods out there, right? And the same thing, PBM says that, you know what, what are some gods we can play? Are you guys going to be sticking to the norm this game, or is there any questionable picks that are maybe going to be coming through?
Yeah, it's tough to say, I guess. Mike and I, we both played 8 different gods in 8 different games, you know, so ideally we can keep that going, but yeah, we're, you know, eventually you're going to run low on some gods, but we got some pretty good big god pools, you know, so maybe we can keep that going if we're feeling it.
Well, I'm excited to see it. I'm sure everybody else is. Good luck in your games, man. Thanks for your time. We'll get to see you take on the Bolts in just a few minutes.
thanks.
I'm really excited. I'm not kidding. I'm really excited. Yesterday because I think I saw FineOK tweet it, my immediate reply was just genuinely me getting ready to scratch off some of these not yet played gods off my list. And well, guess what? PBM matched me with that energy and said, "Okay, give me some gods." I said like Kumba, I said Arachne, I think I said Kali. Like I was just like, "All right, give me the hard to picks. Give me like some Zeus, some Vulcan. Make it weird for me." It sounds like they do recognize that they probably can't just lock it in nothing but like Zeus, Anubis, Vulcan in this, but definitely something that's going to be interesting. I mean, if you are trying to continue the streak, and I'd have to pull up their pick bands just to give you the long list of. Well, actually, Jade Dragon's not quite as long as it could be. Scarabs have a little bit more, but the different gods they've played throughout all of these. Where do you go if you're trying to continue as an assassin? I mean, there's not a whole lot of room for Sam to jump to the next one.
Yeah, unfortunately, us assassins, us jungler players, don't have that exact same privilege that mid laners have of just having legitimately 40 mages in the game. Maybe we see him try and dip his toes into that mage pool. Sanford Soccer could go towards the Hubwa, maybe even potentially the Ao Kuang. I mean, Bastet's still out there. Someone has to represent the cat goddess now that Scream's out of the league. I'm sure he's got plenty of options available. Man said it himself, deep god pool.
So I threw myself off. I was highlighting it. Tsukuyomi, Hunbat, Susanoo, Raven, Set, Thor, Thanatos. But then the last one threw me for a loop because it said Fenrir. Oh, but the Dragons have played him twice. And my brain was like, wait a minute. How did he play 8 games and only 8 games and Fenrir was twice? Oh yeah, PBM exists and is flexing the Fenrir through. And that's the strengths of this team. I guess I could highlight all of the supports they have as well, but that would take me a little bit of time to click through all of them. But I mean, you've got things like the Terra already played, Cerberus, your Artios, your Ares, your Xingqians. Like, there are picks in here that I can think of literally 1 to 2 other players picking up over the last year and looking good on outside of PBM. It does feel like this is going to be a lot of pressure. I mean, we highlighted the jungle matchup, but I kind of had to put some pressure onto Jake. I mean, he has been the guy that has been maybe trying to keep up here. And, of course, the one thing I think about both of these teams is the fact that they have pretty stellar jerseys, Mifflin, if I have to say so myself. I really like the way they look, personally. And, of course, they're both doing really well, and they're easy to be favorites of. So make sure that you go hit up Insight Apparel to be able to grab up some of these. Of course, those new shirts. Look, I need to highlight this in case it didn't come through. I said this earlier, but there's gray, black, and white for all of these. You get the nice logo on the front. I actually think these look really clean in my eyes. That Valkyrie blue balancing off the black. Of course, you know, if they just lost, look, guys, I know how you might be feeling. I'm looking over there towards the other side. These two logos definitely able to rock it. But they're the teams right now, Mifflin. I think there's a lot of preparation to be done, but I'm also going to give you a little bit of a room to stand on and say that when your support and your jungle have 8 different picks across 8 different games, that makes it a little difficult for the Bolts to know what to prioritize.
Yeah, what are you banning if you're the Bolts? I think the Bolts, if anything, might give a little bit more credence towards that Fenrir. Mike just looks so dominant on that pick, and that's one that's kind of lasted between seasons so far. But, 16 picks between 2 guys, or maybe 15 since they both rock the Fenrir. It makes it so hard to elect where you're going to go in the ban phase. But it means that the Bolts can focus more so on themselves, look inward before outward, and figure out what exactly it is that they want to play. What is it that they're going to prioritize, and what is it that they're going to try and force the Dragons to let through?
I'm excited to see how they shake this one up. Again, I think a lot of pressure falls onto Jake right now. I mean, Sobek has been a big pick, Ymir a big pick for them. But there's a lot of picks I'm worried about them getting on her. I think is the most picked by the Dragons. And Panda Cat, look, I think Panda Cat's willing to play literally anything and everything, but on her's a pretty easy go-to right now for most of these hunters. But there also has to be exactly who I was about to mention, Yanis. He's been played 4 of their 8 games, I presume because he was banned the other 4 against them. And it's something that's going to be worrying. Yeah, you can see 50% ban rate. That's going to go up a little bit here thanks to the Bolts.
Man, Hurriedwin's God Pool getting directly targeted out by the Bolts so far. Wouldn't be surprised if we see them just go ahead and ban out Asilla as well, and I think that would take out literally every pick that Hurriedwin's played so far inside of the league, so you'd have to go just a little bit deeper into the pool. Ares rounds out the top 3 for the Jade Dragons, and the Bolts still trying to deliberate on what they want to go towards. I imagine we see the Jade Dragons likely prioritize Hunter in that first slot. We've seen on her first pick generally for them if the Bolts don't elect to ban it.
They're taking their time to think about this one. Sobek has been a very prominent pick for a lot of these teams. We've also been seeing a lot of King Arthur presence, and I actually think that's worth mentioning. If I remember correctly, the top pick lately for the Bolts has been that King Arthur. Has a 100% win rate for them as well. Granted, it's only across 4 games, but still, that's pretty solid when it comes through, and I'm glad I brought it up here on her band, and
Nice.
King Arthur picked in. That's some deadly premonition to be able to come through. And they picked that up for fine. Okay, look, if there's someone that's going to give Haddix a lot of trouble in that lane, Fine OK is going to be the one to do it. Who do you think you can pick to really try to fight this one down?
Tsukiyomi's still out there, Yamoja's still out there as well, so I don't think they need to prioritize their soul laner here. Sobek also available and taken up, so that is the duo lane locked in for the Bolts. I think fighting King Arthur in lane, kind of a moot point, kind of a lost cause, if you ask me, after he gets those tank boots, that Glad Shield, or the Stone of Gaia available to him.
Yeah.
Kind of feels like you really don't want to step up almost ever, so instead, I think we might see Haddix go towards either the Hercules, just as a sustain through the dive potential of King Arthur, and we've seen him play it in the past, or we might even see him go towards the Sun Wukong. But you gotta believe that once the pick gets back to the Bolts, it will be a soul lane selection, or we're very likely gonna see a ban coming through from the Jade Dragons.
You know, Mifflin, I'm gonna have to admit something to you that I don't typically say this like out loud. It just kind of comes inherently. But like, I was going to mention how King Arthur also has a 100% win rate for the Dragons, and then it kind of occurred to me how redundant that is because they kind of have a whole 100% win rate on everything they've played. That's just the way it kind of works when you're constantly winning. Jingwei, though, an interesting pick. I take a quick glance, and not yet played by Panda Cat just yet, so a new pick for him over there in the duo lane. Up against Heimdall, I think I'd said this yesterday while we were watching it. This is one of those matchups that, in my mind, is very relaxed, right? Like, I mean, like it doesn't seem like a lot should be happening, but at the same time, Bera and Panda Cat, I feel like, are going to scrap. How do you anticipate this kind of Hunter 1v1 going?
Well, I'm expecting Heimdall to be the initial aggressor. I expect Barracuda trying to leverage the fact that he's playing a slightly more aggressive god in the early, but once Crit starts to get its feet, once they got the Wind Demon available or even the Deathbringer, I think that's when Jingwei's really going to start getting the advantage there. The additional power from using the dash as well as the AoE autos should give him a slight edge, and that is Haddix's pick. I was right that the Bolts were going to go for a soul laner, but I was not correct in my assumptions. It is Achilles locked in. It's likely to deal with this King Arthur once you start getting some ganks rolling through to deal that damage. That Execute could deal with some of that hard to finish off factor that the King Arthur has, and now the bans start to roll themselves out as well. Look, I think that the Jade Dragons come away with a very strong draft with the top 3 here, but it doesn't exactly scream to me that early game dominance that we so associate with them. Maybe it's that association that the Jade Dragons are trying to remove themselves from. Instead, just a good team instead of a good early game team seems to be the narrative that these guys are starting to push for themselves. And you know what? Unbleeding, unlosing inside the league so far, I'm willing to give them whatever they want.
Well, are you ready for this one? This one's kind of melting my brain, especially because that Serket ban comes through. Every pick the Dragons have is a 100% win rate pick for the Bolts. If the Bolts were drafting this, I would argue, like, oh man, this looks really good for them. They've won on every single one of these. And that's the thing that's really interesting to me. That Serket, as well as their second most picked god for the Bolts, so them banning it away maybe creates a little bit of question. They're trying to limit Sam as much as possible here. That Achilles has not been played for them just yet. You had kind of highlighted what he's going to be able to do. An interesting top 3, but like you kind of highlighted, it feels maybe a little stronger as of right now for the Bolts. They're going to be able to start their lock-in. Scylla set banned out by the Dragons, which admittedly the Scylla makes sense. The set is going to be stripping away from their own god pool. Some junglers being pulled out. It's going to leave not a lot of windows open at this point, and if Sam's trying to not repeat here, he's going to have a very interesting array. I'm also going to throw out if Kumba gets locked in. I'm taking full credit for it because I told PBM to play it yesterday on Twitter. But it's Nemesis that's going to be locked in on the other side here for the Bolts. Lazarus Nemesis has been pretty solid the last couple of times we've seen it.
It has been. Lazarus able to utilize that ultimate. The second he ticks over to level 5 to work his way into these soul lane ganks should make it a lot easier to shut down a King Arthur as well. Sneaky good matchup over there. And then after you strip away that defense as well as the movement speed, should be able to pretty easily find the execute on this Achilles Fafnir being hovered by the Jade Dragons. I got to rely on you for this one, Gore. Is that one that PBM's already played? I'm not quite sure.
No, it was only actually prior to today. It was
Nice.
only played once. I'd have to figure out who exactly it was that locked that one
Baited.
in. But of
Okay.
course, it's a little bit of a debate there coming down from PBM. Good news is, and hold on, let me make sure I'm not lying to you when I say this, they haven't played Yamoja yet either, so he's still keeping track with it. Same thing with the Thor here. So they
Let's
managed
go.
to follow up on their
99.
premise that they're only going to be able to play unique gods. Oh, I'm lying to you. Thor's been played once. Sorry, Mifflin, I missed it. 4 letters. It's smack
well,
dab
PBM at
between
least.
Ares and Ardeo. That was very easy to miss for me. But Yamoja got that one right.
Yeah, and Yamoja coming through after 10 bans, by the way. I mean, kind of wild that she works her way all the way down. Maybe some disrespect towards PBM's God pool. And even though the Jade Dragons do have a little bit of fun keeping PBM on that 9-for-9, different God, different game streak, it does still line up as an incredibly good 5-man core. King Arthur, Jingwei, Yamoja, Thor, and Kukulkan is going to be the team of the Jade Dragons. And it's a pretty orthodox Smite lineup here. You've got a Guardian out of the support, a Warrior in solo, Assassin in the jungle. This is tried and true Smite across the board, but with maybe some slight edge insofar sustain for their team, whereas the Bolts, I think, have a much more Spearhead-esque draft. Once Achilles and Sobek start to get the ball rolling, you better believe Nemesis is going to be in there with them, and it's going to leave Raijin and Heimdall inside the team fight to fend for themselves.
You know, one of the things I think we talk about, and this is probably going to come up in the cast a lot, is that secure and the capabilities like Kukulkan's going to be able to bring, just over what Raijin's going to be able to bring with that ult. But I think the combo here, and you kind of touched on it there, but like the Raijin damage, the Heimdall damage, plus Achilles Assassinate, yeah, maybe it's not neutral objective, but I feel like that's going to be really deadly in these 5-on-5s. Like, is there a world in a 5-on-5 grouping, even with Yamoja on the other side, that the Bolts are the ones really being able to control this late game pace?
I think that the Bolts, in the late game, if this goes hyper late, 35 minutes in, 5 people stacked up against each other,
that's real late.
the Bolts are going to shift their focus away from actually taking the engagement itself and instead try and initiate an instant blow up somebody. Sobek block into Retribution and pray that you have the damage output to kill them before they land, and then take a more advantageous fight later on, because the Jade Dragons draft is just so strong in an actual tried and true 5-on-5 engagement. You've got the sustain from Yamoja, Spirit of the Nine Winds, as you already highlighted, can instantly delete someone with or without some CC to set them up, and then Jingwei is going to scale incredibly well with crit too. So I think, if anything, the Bolts are going to be a little bit more pick-centric, whereas once we start to group up as 5, the Jade Dragon is going to be willing to take all comers in fights.
A dangerous proposition. The Jade Dragons have said, because we kept mentioning it, everyone last year just kept calling them an early game team, which realistically they were a pressure-oriented team. I think when we asked them about it, they just straight up said, we just play the map well. I don't know, like, we don't try to be early game.
Yeah,
we just
early game better.
we just play early game better than other people, and it wasn't necessarily what they were trying. This year has been the conversation of whether or not that translates to the late game as well. We'll get to see it here. The Bolts may be hoping for a longer one. The Dragons teasing up their 100% win rate. Let's find out in game 1.
Thank you, Gore and Mifflin on the desk. Finch and Aggro here as we move into game 1 between the Dragons and the Bolts. This is first and third seed about to do battle, and a chance for the Bolts to catch up with a 4 in the win column if they can get a win here. But Aggro, you heard them saying on the desk, maybe standard Smite across the board from both these teams with plenty of setup, traditional mage follow-up right behind them. What's your read on the pace of this game?
Both teams have pretty solid team fighting comps, I'd say here. With the AoE damage coming from the Kukulkan, from Whirlwind, plenty of CC and setup from Sam and Final K and PBM. And then on the other side, you've got the Bolts with the targeted, let's kill this dude ultimate with the Nemesis, and plenty of setup for killing one dude. You've got Sobek Pluck,
Yeah, and for sure.
You've got High Malt, you've got all that kind of ready to go. So it's more of a matter of, can the Bolts pick apart what the Jade Dragons are going to do as they try and group up and receive this healing from the Yamoja, or will the Bolts fall victim to the AoE of the Jade Dragons?
I gotta think Herwin feels like that key piece. He's sort of the punchline to the setup of what the rest of the Jade Dragons have going. But this team, so malleable, so capable of getting it done with so many different pieces. It's a tall task ahead of the Bolts. You've had a great start to this year. If you all haven't checked out that roster apocalypse video, you did great work on aggro. I'd go look at it because the Bolts had a heck of an off season as Lasper gets aggressive on Irwin and Sam. No relics seemingly forced out in that one though. So go check that one out. Get a kind of some insight into what led into this season. There's a lot of good stuff there. Wait till this set's over, obviously, but then go take a look because there's some good stuff there.
Yeah, plenty of things. As Barrett says in that video, it seems like we just swapped out solo laners and that's all that happened. But it was obviously a whole lot more than that. But so far, it's worked out pretty well for the Bolts. I mean, as you said, they're top 3. The one thing that I've been talking about in regards to this week and this team is that their one loss was to the Atlantis Leviathans, one of the only other top 4 teams. They play the other 2 top 4 teams this week. Right now, the Dragons, the Kings later on. So this is definitely the biggest test for the Bolts. They've looked very good in a lot of those matchups. The week 1 matchup, you can write that off as week 1 up against the Leviathans. It's not that they were outmatched, it's that they had they weren't quite ready for the pace. Haddix hasn't had that much SPL experience. Team was a little bit rusty, all that kind of stuff. I'll buy that if they play well this weekend. But otherwise, it might be maybe there's a further delineation between the top 3 than we initially thought.
Remember how Sam had them power ranked, right? He told us in that interview he had Leviathan's King's Bolt, which we'll get a chance to see if that read from them is correct. And maybe just kind of this start of the season up against, not those top 4 gave the Bolts a good start. Now Jake in position for a purple buff steal, not necessarily an invade as he's alone, but that will not be successful. Good work by PandaCat and Mike to make sure they defended, but that duo lane, so tried and tested. I think we kind of just expect them to pull off small plays like that all the time. Sam just walks up, takes a Harpy away from Lasper, then goes on his way. The thing about it is that I think this combo from Sam and Hurwin can start right when they hit level 5, and Hurwin's already there. Once Sam catches up, I don't see any reason why they've got to be slow in terms of Anvil of Dawn, and then Spirit of the Nine Winds right behind that. That should be ready to go right away.
Especially on the targets of Sobek and Nemesis, because neither one has beads. It's been so prevalent these days that tanks are getting beads. I mean, look in this game, both FidoK and Haddix have picked them up at level 1. I think it's a little bit of an overreaction, personally. I think that your tanks are designed to die come late game, but look at this in the mid lane.
Yeah, but already the ultimate from Hurwind is out, forced by Venenu, who grabs first blood away from the Jade Dragons. They don't look outclassed right now as the Bolts hang with them for first blood, but Barracuda low in left. In comes the airstrike, and PandaCat answers back instantly. Couldn't quite keep up level 5, but now Sam wants something back. Lasper out of health and out of mana and out of options as Sam finds the second kill of the game. Non-stop action across the board. The Dragons get the 2-for-1, but first blood bounty does go to the Bolts.
Just a little bit too early there for Sam, or too late, I should say, for Sam to get up into the air. He had an idea that might be happening, and Hurwin was trying to bait Venenu into doing exactly what he did. Just jump in on me and we'll kill you instantly off the Thor dunk, but Lasper was there earlier than Sam, and they were able to take Hurry off the map. Hurry maybe rushes the ultimate a little bit. It's so, when you're getting double ulted, you just got jumped on, it's impossible to say, oh, hold your ultimate for another 2 seconds to get some setup, but would have been a little bit cleaner in that regard. Hurry's just trying to get all of his damage off in that moment and do what he can. And at the end of the day, it still ends up himself trading a 2-for-1, but it's because of a great rotation over from FidoK that happens.
Right, I mean, in a world where Hurwin waits, maybe he never gets it off, and it's a little harder for Sam to get that cleanup kill on the last. It's hard to say as Sam wants more action, finds Barracuda, just trying to get the beads. Or no, those beads are already gone, so really committing there, see if he could find Barracuda, but has the Bifrost, and too safe is the Heimdall pick. So the Bolts disrupt that combo we talked about between Sam and Hurwin by going for Hurry right away. Luckily, they get good action over in duo as well. PandaCat found that kill up against Barra to even things back out a bit. Is Sam showing a good amount of presence here on left? We don't see a ton of this. Myth's been talking about it a lot. The junglers kind of stay away from duo lane for now. Do you like that? I mean, there's so much farm on the right side of the map that it makes sense. Or do you want to see a bit more left side pressure from him?
I'm fine with Sam spending time on those left-hand side because Barra doesn't have those beads. And if he can just land the ultimate, Panda's going to follow up with a knock-up, and Barra's going to die before he had a chance to get his ultimate off. So it's worth Sam's time. A little bit unfortunate that he doesn't go for that purple buff invade. Didn't have the perfect information of where Lasper was right away. and with Heroin not having mid priority, that's a risky buff to go for, is that purple on the left-hand side. So it makes sense for Sam to back up. You want to get an invade off in that sort of scenario. That's kind of the perfect setup, is we're going to come over. It's an opportunity for a gank. If it doesn't work out, then I'll take the buff, and I get a win either way. But in that instance, Sam doesn't really get a whole lot, just splits half a wave with Panda Cat and falls a little bit behind because of it.
That's something that makes sense for him to go for. Sam just didn't quite pan out that time. Doesn't look like anything too surprising happening in this itemization. Likely stone cutting coming next in here for Lasbra, off Ruin. That all adds up. But look at the bolts now. Aggressively on the order side of the map, and Mike seems to be maneuvering around this trap as FineOK puts good damage into Haddix. But this might be for this blue buff invade. That does seem to be where the bolts are heading, but with this much defense here from the Dragon, Sam and Mike here, looks like not much chance of making that happen. So a little bit of lurking there from the bolts in the jungle, and there wasn't a whole lot for them to do, but doesn't quite end up amounting to much. Is a good recovery there from the Dragons to show up.
But even though they don't get the buff, that's still worth it for the Dragons. They forced FineOK to not only not get that blue buff experience, but for Mike and Sam to end up splitting it, and you're seeing a small lead start to develop in a couple different places. Haddix, slight XP lead over FineOK. Venenu, slight XP lead over Heroin. Those are things that you can start to fight around, because the left side of the map, Bera's been set a little bit behind. He's down 30-plus Devo stacks. That's not always easy to fight into.
Good pressure there. It looked like they knew for sure that Lasbra was down because they were on their way. Yeah, they've got some defensive boards around those back Harpies. So when Lasbra steps up, they were aware, able to force his blink out at the very least. And as you already covered, Lasbra can't have beads, has those blinks. So not only does he not have the beads if Sam's able to find a dunk, but forced to use that blink defensively in the trade-off anyway. So maybe an opportunity in this middle lane for Sam to get aggressive. They are a bit behind in experience in those matchups you listed, but it's kind of a bit back and forth. Jade Dragons are still right there with them, for sure. This was still close here in the early game, but the Bolts doing a good job, I think, to keep up with an early game dominant squad like the Jade Dragons have been. There's a lot of teams that already were staring at a pretty hefty deficit at this point.
Definitely, and the Bolts are just willing to take these fights. They understand that they're fairly strong at this point in the game. Cuckoo Khan is not swinging nearly as hard as he will later on. Jing Wei, not going to be as consistent right now in terms of her damage output as she will be once she gets some crit online. Heim just better at fighting with his abilities at this point in the game. I like the Bolts' willingness to be aggressive, because I think they can play around this Raijin very effectively, and they've done so far. The matter of how long can they keep up this pace and keep up, not giving up an inch on these invades is important, as a good steal from Heroin secures his own red. And it's these little wins from the Dragons. They aren't late to any of these buffs. They're showing up. They're defending them successfully. Now it's Panda Cat who's got to be careful, though.
Comes the aggression from Lasbra. Slow already placed, and then comes the slice and dice, but up into the air with the airstrike, and Panda Cat gets out of there without having to use the beads. And trades his ultimate out for Lasbra. It looks like they will use this time to at least secure that suicide Harpy. So a little bit gained from that, but maybe not too much that has Panda Cat too worried on the back. Because now Jake rotating over to solo, as well as Panda Cat with a big lead over Bera gets aggressive, but so do they get aggressive in solo, but FineOK, too safe, makes it back to the tier 1, and now it's back towards Bera, who's in trouble. They'll rides the Bifrost back to safety. Even though there's aggression everywhere,
Mike.
even the ultimate coming out, Mike hard committing here and does get Bera to drop the ultimate, but nothing else coming out.
Yeah, that's a hard trade to evaluate, because River's Rebuke is so valuable in team fights, but Bera loses a lot of safety without that ultimate. I mean, beads, you can interrupt him transporting through the Bifrost. If his Bifrost placement isn't great, then it's pretty easy for you to knock him up or stun him out of that. And then all of a sudden, you've got yourself a kill over here in the duo lane. And just keeping Panda Cat with a lead, it keeps the tempo in the Dragon's favor, because their Hunter will have his ultimate first.
It works so far, but Jake makes it past anyway with a good blink, able to force Heroin's beads out. That's got to be music to the ears of Lasbra and Ven. A chance for them to now find some pressure. And this is exactly what you meant without that ultimate for Bera. Pandacat seems to freely be able to get aggressive in that 1v1 in the duo lane. And as such, Barracuda forced to back off. But it's Herwind in mid who's still the more vulnerable for not having those purification beads. And the Bolts are getting aggressive along that fact. Mike is the target. They drop Nim ult on him, and out comes Herwinds in response. And they've survived the aggression. Now FinoK wants to re-engage. Sam dunks down as well, but Jake has escaped to the right-hand side, and Haddock seems fine as well. Aggression from the Bolts responded to by the Dragons, but still, no casualties result.
I mean, that's, what, 2 ults for 2 ults on both ends? Not too bad on either side. I'm impressed with the ultimate there from Herwind. You don't see Spirit of the Nine Winds use a peel tool that often, but that's exactly what he did right there, utilizing more so the knockback than the damage, though I'm sure he wasn't too upset about the damage that he was able to put out. Little surprised that Sam didn't go for Jake. I mean, he was CC immune, of course, but maybe would have had enough damage just through landing down in the Berserker's barrage. That percent protections can throw that calculation off easily.
Haddock's trading much more favorably up against Sam than Sam would have liked, but Herwin and Mike are on the way, and Jake stepping forward. That tail whip able to make it back to the tier 1 nice and safe. Both teams doing a really good job of responding to well-timed and well-placed aggression on the other side. I know it doesn't look like there's much of separation between these two teams. Made out 500 in favor of the Dragons. That's because both teams have done a great job of responding in this early game so far, and it's impressing me with the Bolts, with sort of their macro play, with understanding where they can look for pressure, and now Lasbra would love to do it in duo where the purple buff is up and Pandacat left alone, nothing he can do to defend there. Another small win goes the way of the Bolts.
And this is so interesting to watch from the perspective of, think back to last year when this team was playing up against this Jade Dragons roster and how they would do things very similarly the first 6 to 8 minutes, and then a couple invades wouldn't go well, and then all of a sudden the Bolts would just stop. It was the Renegades then, they would just stop invading. They were like, all right, it's not working. Now they've matured a little bit. They understand that, hey, we can just keep doing it, and we just keep having the option of forcing them to make mistakes, and we're going to keep up our pressure, and they've done that very, very well. But you got to give credit on the other side of the Dragons, because they have not looked out of control during this whole match. Sometimes when teams start getting chain invaded, even if they end up defending their buffs over and over again, it's like, wow, lucky to get that one. Got fortunate enough that one didn't die, or one person escaped on 1 HP. The Dragons don't look frazzled by this, and so both teams, I think, trading blows very effectively so far.
Life did just get a bit harder for Lasbra. Look at these backline relics for Herwin and Pandacat. It's the upgraded shell already. They don't have a huge window left on that. I think it's next week those changes are coming in for it, but for now, those block stacks certainly still there, and certainly going to make life miserable for an auto-attack focused jungler like Lasbra, and that is the route he's going. Has the stone cutting, and I believe working towards an Erendite as we speak. So he'll be looking to get in there and stick to him with some autos, and that's going to be made that much more difficult by this relic selection coming out from this backline. But as you've already covered, great work from both these teams. This has so far kind of lived up to it. I know it hasn't maybe resulted in it on the scoreboard, but in terms of this decision-making, the macro play, I think both these teams have been impressive.
This is the SMITE equivalent of the pitcher's duel. It might not look flashy if you're just tuning in and you aren't an endemic viewer of SMITE, but these types of games, I think, are so interesting to watch from a high-level perspective, because both teams are really tiptoeing the wire very, very effectively and getting these marginal leads. And you see the differences in playstyle materialize as well. The Bolts are trying to funnel a little bit more farm into Venenu. Lasbra, much more of a gank-oriented jungler, not getting quite as much farm as Sam. And Sam is starting to pull pretty significantly ahead in this game. But Venenu's up about a full level, or maybe even a level and a half, over Herwind at this point. So you're seeing where that farm is going a little bit more consistently. It's more concerning to me, not the 2-level deficit in jungle for the Bolts, but the 1.5 to 2-level deficit in support as well. Normally, you'll see that be a little bit more normalized, because supports are going to share more. Supports mirror each other more than junglers do on their rotation. So you end up a little bit more similar in farm on supports in games like this than in jungle at times, based on how the play styles are going. The fact that both Sam and Mike have a lead means that maybe Veneno is being a little bit too selfish, or the Bolts are intentionally giving him even more farm than some teams would give their mid laner in games like this. That just means that Ven's going to have to really make use of it. He's going to have a big team fight around this Gold Fury.
He's got a good shot to do it. It's the Bolts that set this pace and have sort of dictated where the battleground will be, with this Fury having spawned under their watch on this left side of the map. It's the same relics we see Mike get all the time, though. Sunder enhanced and Frenzy ready to go. And he loves that those allow him to set the pace in these team fights. My team's stronger now, and you're that much weaker. He's decided who the target is with that relic in the Sunder. But looks like Bolt's not trying to force a fight just yet, even though FineOK now already rotating out and matching what Haddox has already done. Staying group as they've done all game. There's a bit of an engagement in, and Mike the early target. So FineOK goes right to Veneno in the back of the fight, who still has not responded with relics as Sam comes crashing in and makes himself known. But Herwin able to find the damage to take down Jake, already removed. Is the support for the Bolts, so the Dragons find the first blood in this engagement, and FineOK not done, forcing the fatal strikeout from Haddox defensively. And I think we all know where the Jade Dragons are heading next. They don't have Herwin's ult, so maybe they're feeling a little bit of apprehension here, but certainly still favored to at least force the Bolts in for a fight.
Level 17 for PandaCat on this Jingwei. Wind Demon complete as the ultimate comes down on a FineOK, but a great wall from Sam stops the aggression instantly.
9 gods and 9 comfortable games from Sam. That guy's nuts. Herwin a little too far forward, and Veneno gonna take his damage, and no one can step in to burn him during the slow movement. In comes Sam, but he falls as well. Great Thunder Crash there for the Mez, and just like that, the Bolts have answered back so far. The 3 versus 1 matchup has lived up to the name.
Man, that's exactly what you need Veneno to do. If he's going to get that much farm, and the Dragons are going to commit 2 shells instead of 2 Aegises on their back line, you've just got to be aggressive with those Tycho drums. He gets good poke onto Herwind, and then says, wait, why am I not just dumping Tycho drum damage in this man? What's he going to do? Shell it? That's not going to be enough. And a bit of a miscommunication, which can happen, an overlap of those shells from Hurry and PandaCat. So you don't just double your shield, you just refresh it. That means that he got a lot less potential HP than he could have in that moment.
FineOK trying to get a little bit back on the back of a fight that initially looked good for the Dragons, as you just covered. Veneno almost single-handedly just finding an avenue for damage and turning that fight around. Looks like he at least wants to come start up this Pyro. Largely alone for this for now. On the way to help is no one still, so it looks like FineOK kind of agreeing. Can't stick to that at this point. But great work from the Bolts, man, to find a way to turn that fight around, and in particular, to trust Veneno. I think a lot of people consider Ven more like a role player for this squad, and I think he has been, but that's not all his role can be confined to. As Pyromancer low, Herwin confirms it with the ultimate. Frenzy was popped to confirm that as well. So the Dragons perhaps signaling they're not looking for many more fights on the backside of that Pyro.
Relic Dagger is done for Mike, so it'll be sooner rather than later on that Frenzy cooldown, and I don't mind that call. I mean, if you're going to be going for the Relic Dagger anyways, it's up in less than a minute. I don't think that the Bolts are in any position to try and burn fire, especially with FineOK and Sam sticking around on that right-hand side of the map. Like the call, got to be a little liberal with that usage of that Frenzy. But the Bolts have to be more wary, even though they came out ahead on that Gold Fury fight. Because of a misexecution by the Dragons, the initial engagement from the Bolts was not exactly the what they're looking for. They blink pluck Mike in the mid lane, and Mike was trying to get blink plucked the whole time. He was baiting for Sam. You can't just assume that Mike is out of position. That's not going to happen very often these days. I think that Jake in particular needs to be wary of taking those sorts of baits from the front line of the Jade Dragons. Plucking Mike and plucking FineOK is risky business. You've got to be sure that you're going to have the damage to kill them before they can get their skills off.
It's just not going to be easy. This reinforced shoes into the Thebes build has made the support so tanky. The 3-man grouping in right for the Bolts, though, and FineOK is right in the middle of it, and simultaneously Lasper in the sights of the Dragons as well. So Veneno dashes in, goes up into the Tycho drums, and FineOK never feels the need to be pulled back in. He dropped the beads and allowed him to get out from that control, so a small win for the Bolts. I know they traded Tycho drums, but FineOK that much more vulnerable to the CC chain. could potentially create an opportunity for him.
Taiko Drums isn't a super long cooldown, plus when you factor in Raijin's passive of removing flat cooldowns away as you use your abilities, that'll be up fairly soon, even with only 10% CDR there for Venenu. Don't mind them trying to go for that play, but it is a good damage check for both sides. FineOK realizing that I'm really not in that much danger whenever those Taiko Drum shots are coming through. Maybe Ven was using the taunt shots, which do less damage pretty significantly,
Yep.
and that's why it looked like they didn't do a whole lot, but I just think FineOK is that tanky at this point. Ven doesn't have a Soul Reaver. I don't know if he's going to go for a Soul Reaver in this game. I think after that play, I would probably consider it, just based on how much HP Fine has built, but you're not going to get as much value out of that as you would some other items. Some other 10% item in that final slot might fit a little bit better for Venenu.
Look, our ADCs are the only ones level 20 right now, and they both took the big power spike of upgrading those gilded arrows to the ornate arrow, but Barracuda has the short sword. Will that even come into factor, though, as FineOK goes right for Venenu in the back of the fight. They drop Nimhold on him, but Heroin has the backup, and Lasbra removed from the equation, forced to fall back out of the fight, so Sam takes to the air, looking to re-engage, and chooses Lasbra and Venenu on the right side, and the Lasbra does go down. Venenu, though, interrupted out of the thunder crash by Sam for Soccer, and that brings Vin down low, both his relics used, and now that much more vulnerable, and the Jade Dragon, smelling blood in the water, get aggressive. This is what they do so well. It looks like you're sticking with them all game, and they will find that weakness, that opening, that crack, where they can break through, and they've done it just now.
And they forced Ven back to base. It took Ven a long time to reset, too. He is just now leaving the base, and I don't think he's going to get here before this FG gets done.
They might even drop it to take this fight with Jake so low. He still has Lurking in the Waters. Sunder comes out as well. Perhaps used a bit earlier, but it's Airstrike that moves him in. Barracuda inside the Bifrost, but cannot travel through it in time, is too low, and Bandicat will find yet another kill. And removing the backline, and Heroin deletes Venenu, but Vin gets damage on his way out, at least gets rid of Sam for Soccer, but that's not going to slow down the Jade Dragons. FineOK has his sights set on Jake, who's not feeling awesome today. FineOK finds one more, 3 members sitting on the bench in timeout as the Dragons come back to the FG.
No ultimate again for Venenu, and Lasbra's coming back full HP and ultimate available. I don't think that they can do this, as well as a little bit of a botched tank on this Fire Giant. They can't seem to get the aggro onto Mike. I don't know if they're going to be able to do this fire now at all.
No, and it didn't even seem as though Bandicat wasn't on it for that attempt anyway. Stepped over towards the buff, maybe wanted some healing, and now they're back onto the objective. Lasbra can come in if he likes, but no beads. Perhaps a scary prospect. Frenzy popped, this signaling perhaps a commitment, but Lasbra doesn't want to let it go for free, but a great ult should keep Heroin okay in the backside of the fight. And he drops an ultimate to confirm the Fire Giant for the Jade Dragons. Lasbra made it as complicated for them as he could in that position, but the Dragons, too seasoned, too comfortable, and they take the objective.
I feel like FineOK is the dad, like, listening to his kids argue about if they can, they can't get into the bag of chips in the back seat. He was zoning away Haddix, then he turns around and goes, all right, kids, I'll do it. I'll pull the Fire Giant for you so that we can get it done.
Did he get his dash?
Lasbra, he got his dash. Sam's already gotten it. Sunder's there as well. Good slow. Sam's going to need to freehand it and just a little bit off the mark on that Mjolnir's attunement, and gets the beads there from Jake. So good job by Jake making sure that Sam gets punished for going for that play onto Lasbra. But at the end of the day, even with that not going super well for the Dragons, they still have 5 members now with Fire Giant. You mentioned Pandacat has the Ornate. Well, he backed and bought a full Deathbringer, so he is locked in and ready to go. In fact, nearly everybody has their upgraded relic, or has the option at least to have their upgraded relic on the side of the Jade Dragons.
Ages there. Passion, they've got some good tools on their side. As the tier 2 tower and left comes down, and this is when you collect off the check you signed back over at Fire Giant. You come with a draw from these tier 2s and extend this lead out a bit more. It has now reached up to about 5,000 in their favor. And things turned in an instant, didn't it? It was that right side engagement, kind of on the back of FG, where Sam made the call to all-in dive. He gets Lasbra first, forces out Ven, and that's what sort of starts that conveyor belt of the bolts having to come in and try and make it harder for them to get fire, but never having all 5 members there with their feet set. It's good work from the Dragons. They do that kind of thing all the time, where even if things seem even, they're able to figure out where their opportunities are.
And that fight started because Fine just had really good target selection, blinked in, picked up Venenu, and forced him out. And then all of a sudden, the bolts are trying to go on Fine as if that's going to work. Even with the Nemesis ult, you're not going to have an opportunity. This hi-rez pickup is just perplexing to me, Finch, because you see this wasn't built until after both upgraded shells were already locked in for the Jade Dragons. You're not getting a hi-rez proc on a backliner at all here if you're Lasbra. He's been very unimpactful in the damage department. It shows in the player damage charts. Hasn't felt like a whole lot of impact from him quite yet, and I think the build is a big reason why.
No surprise to see Fine and Sam at the top of that list as the tier 2 tower being pushed in, a soft defense from the bolts with Lasbra lurking in the jungle. I think Sam had heat on him the entire time, knew where he was, kept him out. It's the tier 2 tower in left and in right now down, only the mid one still standing. I think the Dragons have eyes for it as well. Only about a minute left though on this FG push, so might not be able to get a Phoenix here as Mike gets plucked in. At the same time, Haddix will engage onto the back line of the Dragons, try and keep Mike isolated, but Mike too tanky. At this point, as Sam dunks down and Jake has become the target, so that means the Bolts have to step back in. They don't want their support to die on the right side for free, and Sam takes a ton of damage. Haddix gets the last bit of damage. The Bolts find a window of opportunity to cut into the Dragons' lead, but with just Sam going down with the tier 2 towers likely being all they had planned anyway, I don't know if the Dragons are really feeling all that bad about it in the first place.
Yeah, Sam makes a lot of plays for this team and does so many things so well. But if there was one thing that I think he gets still caught up in a little bit from time to time is that sometimes he makes up his mind that I'm killing this dude and I'm not changing my mind no matter what happens. So I'm getting up in the air and I'm getting the kill. Okay, it's only Jake. Who cares? I'm landing on him. Okay, he ulted. Who cares? I'm hammering on him with the rest of the bolts still right next to him. Just a big overcommit onto the support there from Sam for Soccer, and he gets picked off fairly easily. It was a good ult from Hurry without a whole lot of setup, still found a couple targets, but just not quite enough. And that certainly slows what the Jade Dragons are going to be able to do. They get a little bit off the back end of that, but 9,000 gold at 28 minutes isn't that massive. Just take a look at the itemization for each side. Yeah, there's, Panda Cat's full build, but so is Barracuda. Hunter builds are cheap and OP, and we all know it. Now you look at the mid laners, they're kind of in the same spot. You only have the upgraded starter for the solo laner and the jungler over the bolts, and those are big deals, certainly. But it's not like a 10,000 gold lead at 20 minutes. There's a massive difference in itemization at those points. I don't think the Dragons did enough to guarantee this fight.
River's Rebuke coming out. Haddix is trapped inside, and the damage raining down. Another big pick from the Dragons, and that's what they do best. Still no shell for Hurrywind, but it might not matter if he's able to comfortably sit in the back line while Jake gets locked down by the Dragons again. The front line's removed. A decision to hard commit to them this time and blow them up as a squad, not just Sam on his own, and that is it for any hopes of defending this Fire Giant if you're the Bolts. I wonder if the Dragons can afford to wait on the EFG on this one. I think likely they could, so likely should. About 15 more seconds. Looks like that will be the call to make sure they get EFG on the back of this. Huge win for the Jade Dragons there.
Yeah, this is smart. You hold off on it, but Venenu is coming in. This is risky now. As soon as Ven shows up, they should know it. No, Ven gets all the way into the pit, and the Dragons get it, but now Ven is just dead.
Yeah, I like what Ven was doing, but 14-14 from the Spirit of the Nine Winds. That's sayonara in numerical language there, as he is sent into the Shadow Realm, and now the Jade Dragons will just push down this right side lane. 4-member strong, Sam on the way to make it 5, and no one on the Bolt in position to set up a defense just yet, so Panda Cat gets free reign. Not an Amir that can just put a wall up this time, and the right side Phoenix goes down. But in comes the pluck from Jake, and Mike is the one pulled back into the wolves, but Jake pays for it dearly, and the Dragons have a chance now to re-engage. Haddix is the target. Lasbra losing the duel up against Sam, who is able to find it with a good wall. 3 members down, just Barra and Haddix. This turns from a Phoenix Siege into a game-in call. Frenzy pop, River's Rebuke down, and the Dragons get it done in 30 minutes, 50 seconds against the Bolts.
Listen, it's exactly what I was just talking about a little bit ago, where a couple, last season, They had a couple close games for the first 10 minutes or so, and then it feels like the Bolts lose their appetite. You know, they're being aggressive, and all of a sudden they go, yeah, we're done invading because it didn't go that well. It's the exact same thing that happened there. A couple of team fights don't go well, and it feels like their mental just crumbles a little bit. Venenu moseys on into the Fire Giant pit and is never going to steal that. And, you know, even if he gets the 1% chance that he does steal it, great. You had 2 people with EFG, and now they've got 3 dead and still get your right side Phoenix. And then they get right side Phoenix, and Jake goes, well, hold on, fellas. Don't you want our Titan? It just gets in there and ends up plucking Mike, the worst target. I don't know, man. The Bolts are so close. You know, the Bolts are so close. They do so many things so well. But Lasber has got to find a way to be more effective than he was in that game. He was pretty much invisible. And they've got to stay strong mentally, man. They've got to stay strong.
The Dragons, though, have that effect on people, able to kind of force mistakes at times. Yeah. Feels like they do it there. Great game 1 win for them up against the 3 seed. We'll see if they can find another or if the Bolts bounce back right after this break.
Welcome back, everyone, to the SBL powered by Alienware. But right now, we're going to be talking a little bit more about Insight Apparel and the way things look. Of course, if you're a Dragons fan, I'm sure you're really happy to know that you can go out, get a hoodie, get a jersey, get a shirt, as well as some of the new merch that's been able to come through. But that applies for every single team. Bolts fans can unite the same way the Leviathans fans, and I could start naming off every single team, but you get it. There's also some league gear if you want to be able to pick it up, and you just can't choose a favorite. You just want to support the SBL as a whole. Shop.smiteproleague.com will take you there. A lot of great merch, and again, just recently, some new t-shirts, some new hoodies hit the store, so make sure you go ahead and pick that one up. But I've got Mifflin back with me on the desk here, and we're going to be trying to break that game down. I mean, I think, honestly, I'll admit I saw it on Twitter better to explain it than I could. The Dragons just tweeted, hey, we let the Bolts control the early game, then we won. Like, that's pretty much how it worked out. That's the synopsis of game one.
Was it really that they let them even control the early game? If we're able to go back the full 30 minutes, it felt like the Bolts were at least making attempts at invades, but every single time they were either getting pushed back, securing their own buff, were the Dragons, or just straight up winning the team fight. It felt like to me, sure, the Jade Dragons kind of waited it out a little bit. It was a much slower pace than we're used to seeing from them, and that may have been by design due to their draft. But I think that if anything, it rings true what they've been saying in the interviews all year long. We are not an early game team. We are a good team, and that's exactly what we saw this time around. There were not many flashy plays. It wasn't individual players making the difference for the Dragons. It just felt like once they were grouped up, they were the better team this time around.
And there was a certain moment, you can see, I think that big jump, 22, 23 minutes in, it's still a pretty close game. It's one big fight for the Dragons that really starts to let them pull ahead. But it wasn't honestly until the first Fire Giant that we saw them take a massive gold lead. But the way I described it to you, especially when you looked at some of the experience charts after that very initial, maybe first 10 minutes, it just felt like the Jade Dragons were playing the map a little bit stronger. It didn't necessarily need a lot of team fights to showcase their strength because they were winning elsewhere where there were opportunities for them. So they are able to take that first game up over the Bolts. And, well, let's just go ahead and say it. 9 for 9. They have not lost a single one just yet. There's FineOK, the man who stripped away the King Arthur from the opposing Haddocks, who has been able to run it to a lot of success over the past. I think picks and bans are going to be a very big topic of conversation. Also, Polar Bear Mike, I got to give the shout-outs. Like, Panda Cat, perfect game. Same thing for FineOK. But PPM with the perfect support slash line of a 0010. I mean, that's more than you could want from your support being able to come through. Plus, that Yemoja, I mean, you had highlighted it, was post-10 bans that it gets picked up. And still a good scoop, a little more damage than Jake, just a little less damage than Lasbra, and maybe that's where we can hyper-focus. Sam was able to do more than double what Lasbra was able to bring in terms of damage, and it feels like that is definitely a gap that has to get bridged.
Yeah, Lasbra needs to shift his attention in this match. I mean, if you got to pick a more early game centric god, if you need a global ultimate, whatever it has to be, we need to see more of him. A vacant jungler is so hard to play around, so he needs to get involved. We've seen him play things like the Surcat to get involved a little bit earlier on, or even the Ranatasker to leverage that global ultimate, but this Nemesis was not the look for him. My man was essentially a non-factor.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to see the adjustment going into game number 2, specifically because of, I mean, you had even highlighted at one point we were talking about it. You said Heimdall Sobek were the top 2, right? Well, I looked down, I went, yep, and they're 0-4, and that's exactly what you were kind of trying to drive home. It just feels like the overarching format, or I guess play style, whatever you want to say here for the Bolts, whether it was the god picks, what it was they brought into the game, it just didn't seem to click for them. And so I like seeing this. This is actually one of my favorite shots because you get a good look at who's doing the talking, who's chatting. You can see a couple of mouths moving there on the Bolts, but a lot of conversation going on for the Dragons. Panda Cat, I think, chilling at his friend's house right now. Had some internet issues earlier.
Well,
that's kind of a big,
God.
I would argue, maybe a huge illustration for it, because look how in the zone, I guess, conversationally, they are on the Dragons, and the Bolts kind of need to be in the same area, right? That's the big discussion point between games, is breaking that down and figuring out what to do next.
Panda Cat legitimately has one earmuff off, just vibing with his boy and still somehow putting a perfect game out there on the battleground of the gods on a setup that isn't his, right? That is so impressive. Gotta highlight the young Ukrainian ADC of the Jade Dragons. But I think you're right. We got to address P's and P's. We got to talk about the Olympus bolts and what they need to change. And with that top 2 selection that they had last time around, I think that you might as well be willing to scrap that, right? Go to something new, pick something else, prioritize making sure Lazarus is comfortable.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what adaptations come through for them. As of right now, it is the Dragons once again on your left-hand side of the screen. Bolt's taking that second pick. And lo and behold, Mifflin, this is the exact same route we took to get to game number 1. I mean, to a T, these are the exact same bands in these top 5.
Yeah, it is largely the same, but that doesn't mean that the picks themselves will not change. On her band down, Aries is going to round that one out as well. It is
We'll have to see
the
about
exact
that.
same if memory serves. We'll see if the Jade Dragons make an adaptation here, but why would they, right? It was a convincing win for them. Might as well pick up the King Arthur yet again so that Final K can dominate the battleground. Meanwhile, the Bolts will likely make a shift up here. I'm thinking just prioritize Lazarus. Make sure he's comfortable. Instead, though, Chernobog first off overall.
Now, I will say, I was about to start talking about if this was Heimdall Sobek, I'm going to make sure I'm not in the Matrix because I'm getting some deja vu over here. But Chernobog absolutely breaks the mold that has been able to come through. Worth noting, also a 100% win rate here for specifically the Bolts. And they still get that Sobek. I think Jake has always looked good on this Sobek, and I think it's one of those things, even if you lose a game on him, there's absolutely plenty of reason to go back to it. In fact, they've already lost, outside of that last one, they've lost one other with this Sobek. So it's not always the end-all, be-all. But Jake's Sobek, his Ymir, his Tyr, which we haven't really gotten to see, I don't think at all this year, are things that I love to highlight and I would hope to see. But it kind of goes back to what you had said about the Dragons, which is that they're not changing anything. Is this Cool Khan? Then guess what? They're riding exactly the exact same wave, and lo and behold, they're just playing the same draft again.
Yeah, Jade Dragon's essentially dropping the how many times we gotta teach you this lesson, old man. You're gonna give us the exact same draft. Were you not convinced by game 1? And they're gonna go ahead and run that one back. I wouldn't be surprised if we only see one shift from the Jade Dragons. I mean, Sam might as well go back to the Thor because he's broken his streak of 9 for 9. But PBM could still keep the dream alive. Maybe we see a 10th god in his 10th game.
Man, this is going to get confusing.
So
Look, I know the
multiple
habit.
homies?
Everyone says this, right? So Kukulkan is typically the way you say it, but it sounds very similar to Kukulkan, which is why I at least have been trying to make a conscious effort to make that Kukul Khan, right? That very specific emphasis. But this is going to, look, out of habit in the middle of a cast, this one's going to get confusing for him. But the Kukulkan locked in on the other side. How do you feel about that versus the King Arthur? I feel like this is a matchup we've been seeing a lot more often lately. And with the way things have been shaking down, I think Haddix, especially if he's able to get a little bit of control, he's the one kind of creating space for Lasber to find success.
I think that King Arthur is going to get the better end of that engagement, unfortunately, if you are a Bolts fan. Up until about level 6, I'd say that King Arthur will likely have some form of kill pressure, the threat to perform a kill onto Kukulkan, whereas Kukulkan is going to be kind of playing from behind up until that point, just legitimately less abilities than King Arthur is able to put out. But after level 6, I think both gods are going to equalize a bit. It's going to become more so not who's killing each other in lane, not who's establishing the pressure, but who's able to rotate out first.
Well, I had mentioned it last time around that the Bolts, they banned this Surcat, but it's a pick that they typically go back to, and, well, they're going to do that exactly this game, trading her out for the Emoja in their bans. But a Wheelish online for the other side, this has been something... Look, Sam loves to play this whether or not he has team synergy with knockups, but it is a little bit of a bonus when they do, and this is something I think last year he started picking up a little more...
Don't do it.
Not like topsy-turvy, but just kind of awkwardly. Like, he just kind of threw it out there one day and did really well. It's already something they've played, and they're going to lock it in. You said no, don't do it. How are you feeling about her?
Well, I think Ardio fits this draft just fine, Gore. I was just more excited about PBM's streak there. I mean, the legend of 10 gods, 10 games is lost, unfortunately.
Yeah, I get
but
what you mean.
It does fit the draft. It fits the draft incredibly well. I mean, the cripple field is going to make it harder for Sobek to find his own engage. Surcat largely going to be reliant on the blink in or the jump in and then use the ultimate and then dash out. Well, you can't dash out if you're standing on top of a cripple field as well. I think that Ardio is going to be a very good anti-aggression tool for their team, and the Jade Dragons largely are bringing a similar identity that we saw in Game 1. It's a very standard SMITE draft, but maybe with a little bit more so of an early game leaning. Artio can get involved a little bit earlier than Yomoja on those rotations of more aggressive style, as will a Wheelish. I mean, I've said it before, at level 6, that Feather Step starts to feel like it execute, just the amount of damage that it does. I think that the Jade Dragons might have expedited the pace a little bit.
And you hit all the things that I was going to ask about, which was mainly the bottom two there for the Dragons, because guess what? That's the only thing that changed for them. Everything else looked good last game. And so, like you said, maybe expediting their early game. But it does bring the question over to the other side. Lasbra going into the Serket this time around as opposed to the Nemesis feels a little more proactive than what Nemesis can bring. Nemesis feels a little more set up. Serket kind of is that hybrid setup and damage. But the Merlin as well for Vin, a lot of good objective shred, maybe not confirm in that regard. So similar problems as the last game. Does the change up for the jungle in the mid bring enough to the Bolts to let them put on a better fight this time around?
I think that they have the ability to fight in, and they had the ability to fight in with their draft last time around. I think it's going to come down to more so the play on field, whether or not Lasbra gets involved at all, I'd say, right? If he comes in with an ultimate to set up for a kill, I'd say he's already gotten more value in Game 2 than he did in Game 1. And Serket is a pick that I think should be able to play to his style incredibly well. I mean, we've seen him perform on this pick in the past consistently, so I don't see why that should change up here. My concern more so is for the duo lane of the Bolts. Last time around, they got straight up diffed, but this time, Barracuda has got an adaptation inside of the Chernobog selection. That's something that he's been pretty consistent with, and if he doesn't choose to fight inside the lane, can at least use that global ultimate to rotate into the team fights. I think the Bolts have got a lot of tools that they can utilize throughout the early. It's just whether or not they actually do it.
Now, Mifflin, I heard, I'm going to argue maybe 50% of what you said. I was really distracted watching Ellie in the background carrying that toy that looked just way too big for her. It was adorable, as all things could be. So I guess really well played there by Ellie, but also really exciting for the Bolts as time is going to go forward. I'm really excited to see what this can do. I think a lot of these picks have been solid. I think the Bolts are at least getting put to the test here. This has been the conversation that has been had for the last couple of hours. We started there with Waiting Room. Are the Bolts a team that can only beat the bottom four, or can they take on these top three? Let's see if they can bring it back in game number 2.
Thank you, Gore and Mifflin. Still Finch aggro, and then Doug providing the views. We move into game 2 between the Dragons and the Bolts. And aggro, a big change here. Sam on this Wheelish. There's some synergies there for him, right? I mean, you can get some knockups off of Panda Cat, maybe even off Herwin's ult. Serket's got a leap in with that ambush. But I feel like this might be a bit more about the early presence this can give him. Is that how you expect Sam to play this, aggressive right away, or is he waiting for those synergies to really line up?
You know, I would normally say, yeah, it's definitely about that early pressure and early fight potential that it has, because normally it is, but for whatever reason, I feel like when we've watched Sam play this pick these last few years, he's willing to take it late and then somehow ends up winning a lot of his duels as a late game of Willish, which makes next to no sense. But maybe I'm remembering incorrectly, but I kind of think of this pick as a more one-on-one in the mid to late game style selection where Sam just uses Gravity Surge as a power stim and an attack speed stim, and then just wins his 1v1 up against Lasbra, and he should have a pretty good matchup there. Serket can 1v1 in the late game. She can be very good at that given the right build, but that's not really the build that people are going for right now. The build right now is much more hybrid and defense oriented for most Serket players.
Well, Sam does have that blink already, as you said, so we could easily see Gravity Surge blink just for the damage dealt in Lasbra. As you already said, going to have his work cut out for him keeping up with Sam's value here in this game. It's a tough task for any jungler out there right now trying to keep up with what Sam for Soccer is able to do on a day-in, day-out basis. Going to have to keep up here in this one. It's awesome Jake, though, that this time around picks up that Sunder that we often see Mike grab. And he's made some adjustments too, Mike. He's on this RDO this time, has elected for a blink. Maybe blink stuns are what's in his future, but Jake electing to go with this Sunder, kind of signaling that maybe they want to do a bit more of that pick composition like we saw in Game 1. Can that work here up against this draft from the Jade Dragons?
Absolutely. They still have the capability of plucking the Willish off or plucking the Kukulkan and insta-killing them. I mean, RDO pretty easy to interrupt her dash after a pluck as well with that tail whip. So I like the idea of the Sunder. Plus, having no blink there for Jake kind of puts him on a tighter leash, closer to the rest of the team. There were a couple times in the last game that he might have gone a little too wild on the blink plucks and picked the wrong targets. You know, now you're making him stay at home a little bit more, peel a little bit more, and get those priority front lines off of Venenu and Barracuda.
He starts fairly standard, eye of the jungle for both of these junglers. We've been seeing a bit more of this waiting on your starter for the supports. I think when we do see that, we usually see them pick up Benevolence then in that slot. Just go ahead and get these tank boots online right away and then drop that Benevolence in there second. We've seen it work out for them just when they want to split that farm. They do it later as Mike's been plucked in and Barracuda's damage is substantial. The tail whip was there too, and Mike kind of forced to put Ardio's rather short tail between his legs and back off. Good pressure from Barracuda and Sobek in this lane. And people don't think about Jingwei as like a fight god, but any kind of CC into that knockup feels really hard to deal with.
Very difficult to deal with, especially if it's a CC like a root, because that's a knockup with momentum. And if you can stop them from moving and knock them straight up, you get CC'd for a really long time where you're hittable the entire time. That's the big difference, is that you're CC'd for the same amount of time. It's just that a lot of times you're running away, you end up getting knocked up out of range. With something like the RDO route, those synergize very well.
Is he considering a gank here? He does have presence. Mike moves in, and there's the blink. Jake already in trouble, pulled in, and on the jump in, Lasper gets knocked up, so maybe he'll have to settle for Panda Cat as the target here. Does find the Cobra's Kiss, and Panda Cat falls in trade support for ADC, and they have a chance to get Sam to a rotation in from Venenu, and in the early game, the Bolts have again responded, and now up to the sky goes Berra, dropping right back down. Maybe thought there's a bit more he could find on the back of it, but the Bolts got to be happy with a 2-for-1 for early game trade.
He was looking for Mike, who was very low, as Haddock's going to use the beads. He might have Final K dead to rights. He does. Final K gets solo killed by the rookie solo laner for the Olympus Bolts, and a great start to the game for them. They give up first blood. It's kind of the inverse of what we saw in game one, where the Bolts get first blood, but the Jade Dragons start to get kills across the map in the same trade. This time it's the other way around, where the set play by the Dragons, Mike just gets a little bit too low. Panda Cat ends up getting a little bit too low. Him dashing in ends up being too much damage for him to handle. And then Sam, who jumped in order to try and help out Panda Cat, ends up paying for it as well.
Great response from the Bolts. In their early game, I think worth mentioning again, was solid in game one. Really good. They stuck close with the Bolts until around that 23-minute mark or so, and here they are doing it yet again, responding to this early pressure from Sam. And I wonder if the target selection and this boot start is a bit part of that. It took a little longer to kill Jake than I think they would have liked on that dive, and gave time for Lasber to come in, even with kind of an unlucky start for him. I think he must have went into that persistent gust from Panda Cat right when he engaged. He got knocked up, but still had time to catch back up, so now we know for sure the Bolts early game is for real. It is legit. But that never was the question for them. Even when they were Renegades, it felt like, kind of like you clarified in game number one, they'd struggled a bit around that 20-minute mark. One big play would kind of go wrong, and they'd slow down a bit. Now it's the Dragons looking to engage. Mike in first, looking for Vin, who still has beads. Good pressure, but Vin might be safe. But in comes Sam, keeping up the aggression. They finally stop as Barracuda goes up with the ult.
Felt like Sam and Mike were just on two different pages, as Berra is going to land aggressively because Lasber's on the flank.
Yeah, they're sandwiched, and Sam, I suppose, is the meat and the cheese. Venenu finds that kill, and Mike now plucked back in, stuck inside, lurking the waters for the slow, and the Bolts just flat out grouping better at this point in the game. Mike goes down, as was guaranteed with that many members around him, and now 5-1 in the charts, dipping drastically in favor of the Chaos side team.
And that's it. It all comes back to Mike and Sam being on two different pages on that blink. Mike blinks in, messes up his blink a little bit. He's a little bit out of range of Venenu, who is such a great target for a blink engage, having no CC immunity in the kit. So you would want to stun. Mike's a little bit out of range, so he blinks, transforms, then flickers, and then Mike starts to root him. But Sam is on Jake, wants to hit Jake because Heroine can never catch up. to where Venenu is. And so those two just need to be on the same page there. I think they could have likely killed Jake right away. They could have definitely killed Venenu, or at least forced his beads and then backed up and been pretty safe doing it. But because they're on different targets, they end up chasing too deep before they call it off, and then Barracuda's ultimate slows them down and sets up for a great rotation in from Lasbra.
And they're going to have to make sure they're factoring that ultimate in. Whatever they do likely has got to be pretty quick, or suddenly any numbers advantage they thought they had is forfeit. As Barracuda shows up. A little bit of contest on the right side over those Harpies. That ends up not being too crazy as Lasbra lurking in the jungle, maybe even considering a bout with Sam. He knows he can put Sam in the CC chain relatively easy with no beads there for this Wheelish player. With that Cobra's Kiss into that last breath being relatively guaranteed, but alone maybe not jumping in there. But that's something Sam had to be mindful of, and that Lasbra certainly seems eager to try and capitalize on in this active early game. As Mike trades a bit there with Jake, but Jake comes out looking none the worse for the trouble. It's Lasbra now with presence in solo, but fine, okay, handles that easily. That solo kill for Haddix earlier, that's been pretty impactful. He's now about a level and a half, almost 2 levels out in front, and you don't see that very often with Fine OK being behind.
I think this is the first time all year that Fine has been behind in a lane, because the Dragons have made such an effort to get him ahead, and then he has done such a good job of leveraging those leads. I think Fine has looked like the player who's playing at the highest level coming into this set. Haddix taking it to him.
But a good pluck. That'll bring Mike right back in, and no chance for him to survive. This early game has been a bit disastrous for the Dragons, as in comes the aggression from Lasbra, dropping the last breath, and Barracuda landing as well. Deathbane allows for Lasbra to reposition, and now Sam in an awful spot. Pluck back in, and Venenu finding himself a double 3-0-2 for the mid laner to start off this game up against the very best we have in the SPL. The Bolts are not shying away.
They've looked great so far, and these are the games where this team looks mortal. You know, looking back to last year as Ghost Gaming and his team rival, this core looks mortal whenever Sam and Mike get desynced and fall behind, because they're going to continue to look for those aggressive plays a lot of the time, and of course it's not going to pay off. Mike with just too aggressive of a positioning. Hurries did not bring in anywhere near enough damage at this point, and he won't no matter what, because he's Kukulkan, Khan, and that's just not what this character's strength is right now.
Mike continuing to position aggressively. He knew he had the cripple field, so wasn't particularly worried about getting hit by that pluck, as Fine OK steps up as well. They had their blue buff invaded, so maybe the Dragons want a little bit back in trade. They've got 4 members on the right-hand side. No ult for Lasbra or Barra, so they know he won't just be showing up out of the blue. Ward down for the information, but looks like maybe things a little bit too well defended by the Bolts. The Dragons back off for a moment, but are right back in. Fine OK, the first man in, but he breaks off. Blue buff defended by the Bolts, and Panda Cat getting a bit out-traded by Barracuda. He's got a little bit of crit already there. It looks like instead the Dragons will come back and grab the Pyromancer and give up on finding any more of that blue buff in.
Still, this is not what most teams would do in this position, being down by 3,000 gold at 9 minutes.
Get this aggressive.
2,000, I suppose. Yeah, they are the ones walking in, but Lasbra finding Hurry in mid.
And he was just right. No beads there for Hurry means that he's in a coffin. Too easy for Lasbra on that one to pick off the Kukulkan and continue his push forward. And looks like they might even want to leverage this into a Fury. They're nearby, will break the vines, and now they start it up. Barracuda has it pulled. In comes Mike, but really can't contest this alone. I think this Fury just belongs to the Bolts. What a start to this game from the challengers in this matchup. And the Dragons, despite a great game 1 where they really break that late game open, have now given up a near 3K gold lead, more like 2,600 in there in the favor of the Bolts.
And it's been very, very centered around Lasbra in the jungle. He has been everywhere so far, and these are the games where he looks like one of those top-end junglers where every single gank he's doing ends up in a kill. But we see a lot of games where it's the opposite. He just still does these ganks, and they just don't end up paying off for him. This is why this playstyle can work either way, because you have these types of games where you're just able to take over. Ven's been in great position. He's been able to leverage this lead. He's gotten a lot of those kills and is gigantic now, level 13 compared to Herwin's level 11. And Sam's in a position where he can't really gank a lane anymore. Every lane is behind, or in duo lane's case, not exactly equipped to follow up on a great gank. Chernobog just too safe in that lane.
Bolts, though, rotating on to Fine OK, who moves underneath the tower. Beads buys him a moment, but locked down by the Last Breath, continues to reposition. But the Bolts take so little damage with Haddix tanking. Lasbra finds the pick, and the Bolts continue. It feels like they can make no wrong calls through these first 12 minutes. Wherever they want to go, they rotate in more than the Dragons have there and get it done through sheer brute force. Now, Jake continuing to get aggressive on Mike, who's resisting Barracuda with the advantage up against Panicat. He takes to the sky and comes back down for the slow and the cooldown reset, but Hurwin's on his way, and if Barracuda's not careful, he will get pincered in by the Hurwin rotation. Now they get aggressive. Wherever you go, we've got it covered. Aegis keeps him alive, though, against the Spirit of the Nine Wind, but Panicat, with help from his mid laner, does find a kill, but all the while, Tier 1 in right goes down.
Yeah, I just feel like Barra's job in this game is just to wait until the cavalry comes. Not that Barra's behind in any way. He was in a good spot, but that's just a forced play on the left side of the map. Because this is worst case scenario, where now the Jade Dragons have a glimmer of hope. They've got a lane to lean on because Panda Cat gets a little bit of farm and gets ahead. Lasbra no blink, so he's got to close the gap the old-fashioned way. Just too well timed on the backing there from Hurwind and from Panda Cat. No one leaves the other behind.
Exactly. He would have loved if maybe 2 seconds sooner Pandacat leaves and Hurwin's there for him to try and pick on. Not the case, and Sam makes sure the red buff goes down for the Order team. So still about that same mark, just about 2,400 gold. The experience favoring them still in jungle, mid, and support. That mid 3v3 has been winning this the whole time, but Fine OK has stayed relatively close to Haddix. Looks like he is behind in terms of the itemization, where Haddix has the Mystical Mail and that Talisman of Energy finished, and Fine OK just sitting on Rounded Shield, I believe, for that Tier 1. So still some big advantage for the Bolts, even where maybe they're not way ahead of an experience. They should continue this pace for now, it feels like. Aggro continue to try and be in control of where these fights happen, and dare the Dragons to answer without getting their consistent farm in the meantime.
And as long as they're fighting around the right side of the map, and around Venenu in particular, they should be able to do that. Ven is sitting at 4-0-2 and 3 items complete. You're feeling good fighting around him right now. No reason to get involved where Panda Cat is, because Panda isn't massively ahead by any means. You know, he's marginally ahead of Barracuda, but why take a fight around that where you can be advantageous everywhere else? So I just want to see the Bolts continue to keep the, you can keep the pace high at this point. You still have Barracuda having a global ultimate. He can still start to join these fights, but just don't take them on the left side of the map. Problem is that that's likely where the next fight is going to take place, as Gold Fury spawning pretty soon.
Barracuda was just kind of hanging out up there by his own base, just kind of at Phoenix for now, maybe trying to let this wave stay up top so we can keep it pushed up, but it's harder for Panda to farm. Either way, his team will use this moment to move on to the Pyromancer as it spawns. Really only Mike in position to say anything about it. Looks like that objective will be going to the Bolts, unless Mike can pull off a miracle. Does not, ends up going to the Bolt as it should have, and Mike manages to keep himself alive and hold on to that Magai's proc. That's a big pickup for him, since he likely can't afford to get beads. Even once he does eventually get to level 12, they'll need him to still be that auxiliary relic slot. So that'll help give him a little bit more survivability against Plucks or Blink-In Cobra Kisses. Not a bad pickup for him.
Love it, because otherwise he's going to be eating a lot of that CC off the bat. And all the CC that the Bolts have is pretty committal. Either Barracuda has to use 2 abilities, or Lasbra has to be in melee range, or Jake has to pluck you. The only other thing you have to worry about is, a range combo from Ven or Haddix's ult, but either of those, you're happy to immune, and you should just be able to avoid Venenu's combo from a distance. It's pretty slow. So I think the Magi's is perfect in this game. I wouldn't mind seeing Final K grab one as well.
Final K is rotating around top side, but so much damage from Venenu, and Final K already low. In fact, forced to use his ultimate just to disengage, and Lasbra cleans up. He does get hit by that Spirit of the Nine Winds, but Final K is not in the position to make those normal rotations he pulls off. Venenu, just too big.
Yeah, exactly. Normally Final K is like, I could kill another guy there. We're like, what is this? I'm not, what the heck? I can't just 1v3? Like, what's that about? It's like the scene in Space Jam where all the players get their powers stolen and Charles Barkley's like getting clowned on by random people in street ball. Like that was fine, okay, right there. What happened to my power? But that's what you get whenever you've been ahead literally every game all year, and it was an overcommit from the Dragons in order to try and save him. Using Heroine's ultimate opens up this Gold Fury beautifully.
Yeah, no chance for them to steal from range. They can barely even make their way in with Haddix doing such a good job zoning and Heroine just being relentlessly hunted. Mike does make it in there in time to buy some room, but even if Haddix doesn't get the kill, he gets the shell, his team gets the Fury. PandaCat is swinging, as you alluded to earlier. His damage certainly still relevant, but another physical item is on the way there for Haddix. Would not be surprised if it is Spectral to deal with this crit, and that will cut in half, maybe not in half, but that'll cut into the damage PandaCat putting out. And I think Haddix thinks that's very much welcome at this point in the game.
Really the only threat to him. I mean, you saw how much damage he did to Heroine on that dive. Once he has that Spectral armor and it is done, then you're feeling like you're pretty much invincible on this Cucullin for at least another couple levels. It's going to take PandaCat getting to that Deathbringer before he really feels like he can now compete once again with Haddix. Just Lazarus. Panda has no dash.
And so forces the beads and the airstrike out. That's a trade I think Lazarus will take every single day of the week when he essentially just gives up Blink ult to make that happen. PandaCat, who is their shining hope right now that much more vulnerable if they want to come over towards an FG fight. Maybe still a bit early for that at 18:30 in this point in the game, but if you're the Bolts, I think you feel pretty good about forcing the Jade Dragons to come to you on just about any territory at this point.
No doubt. I mean, even PandaCat, now that you have an answer to him in Haddix, who can really tank up that damage effectively for a while, I wouldn't be too stressed about that either. I think of the Bolts, Fire Giant's risky because the Jade Dragons have the Secure over you, so that's always going to be risky when they have Heroine up with ultimate in particular. But Hurry's been really, really trigger happy with that ultimate so far in this set. It shouldn't be too difficult for the Bolts to bait that cooldown out and then head over towards Fire Giant, because they're in that commanding of a position where they could make a play like that happen.
And I think it's really worth keeping an eye on when FineOK gets that dedicated magical protection set up for him. He's working on it now at that tier 1, but until he has it, I think Veneno just has his number. We saw how much damage it was on that Gold Fury attempt when FineOK looked for the backside gank. It did not work. On this next FG fight, maybe he's just got to try and keep Barracuda out of it. I don't know if that's going to be any better, but Ven is not someone he wants to mess with right now. Does finish up that Pestilence. That's pretty big for him. Should give him a better opportunity to try and contest. But will they even get there in time? Fire Giant is indeed the call. And Barracuda making his way in. Mike the first one there and is local. And PandaCat nowhere nearby, not even nearby in terms of the same hemisphere as Mike. Takes too much damage. Looks like the Bolts come off the objective and go for the dive, and Mike should be a free kill. Lasper gets it, but Jake Low in the back as well as Heroine dove on. Great work from the Bolts to find the mid and support right at the start of this engagement, though it looks like PandaCat might try and trade out this tier 2 for it. It's about the best he can do from that position.
FineOK, really the only one still local. Sam's close, but no ultimate, no blink for him means it's tough for him to find a way in.
They do drop the objective and go for Sam on the backside. They leave Jake for dead and try and find Sam, and not even leaving him for dead. As FineOK blinks in, but some backup in the form of Barracuda has arrived, and FineOK maybe goes up to Camelot for Avalon, but that's only going to last for a moment as Venenu improves to 5-0, a rampage for him. Looks like maybe the Bolts, though, want to bide their time. They go to Pyromancer first, and perhaps a reset before they want to come back to Fire again, but I think they've done their job already. Forcing the Dragons in, winning that fight so handily, and then resetting is enough of a win.
They got a lot of relics. I mean, Heroine is going to be a lot more vulnerable now, so that's an easy option for them to go for. Love the pace that they've set. They're not letting the Jade Dragons really set their feet at any point in this game, and they're staying at home. It just continues to be over-aggressive for the Jade Dragons. FineOK blinking in to try and kill Jake. It's just not worth it for him to do that, and now it means that he's down for when they pull Fire once again.
Fire has indeed been pulled, already down below half HP, but the Bolts come off it. They're going to give no chance for a steal. Heroine pulled back in, and Heroine has nothing to do, pulled back in and falls to the hands of Venenu, and they start that Fire up again. very willing to pull it, take the fight, drop it, and go back to it again. And this time, no one steps forward. This time, the fire belongs to the Bolts cleanly as they take a handy, dominant position up against the Jade Dragons. Now a chance to go collect some additional farm from these towers on the map. What a game this has been from the Bolts, and it just goes to show the aura the Dragons have here at this point that both you and I still maybe a little bit reluctant to talk about if this is out of reach for the Dragons. It's not there numerically yet, but if this were reversed, if the Dragons were in this position, I'd feel pretty confident about their position. Time for the Bolts to prove they can get it done when they make it to this point.
It's a good point. Definitely would be a different story if the roles were reversed, but the Jade Dragons have shown that they're pretty resilient. They just can't afford to keep making these same mistakes. Yeah, they have for sure. I mean, you think back to that play where Fine blinks in to try and kill Jake, it opens up that fire being a lot easier for the Olympus Bolts, and it was Mike being over aggressive and Sam being over aggressive and Fine OK being over aggressive. I mean, they haven't had to play from this position a whole lot this season, and I think that honestly is shown in this game. They have been overestimating their strength at every turn so far here in Game 2.
Seems that way, you know. It's like maybe a championship boxer that hasn't taken a big hit in a while. And let's see how the Dragons can react now that they've taken one to the jaw. They've already lost the tier 2 over in left. That extends the gold lead out a good amount for the Bolts. They're now up 10K at this point in the game and still have 2.5 minutes, a little under that, to come back and collect a few more towers, and I think they will. Rod of Tahuti finished out there for Veneno. Yeah, that gold lead is at a crazy point. 10,700 experience, too. Maybe not as crazy at this point in the game when we are approaching level 20s for everyone, but really only Panda Cats there for the Dragons at this point. They don't even have a lot of upgraded starters just yet to compete with the Ornate era, with the Protector of the Jungle, the Bluestone Brooch that have been finished. So a lot of stuff they got to worry about as Jake finishes off his Spectral as well, almost a Pridwin for Haddix, and of course full build for Bera. This is not going to be an easy defense, but how do you like the Dragons' odds at keeping them at bay? I don't know if this will be a full Phoenix Siege, but at the very least they'll lose these tier 2s.
Kukulkan is phenomenal in these sorts of situations. He's one of the best when it comes to the Phoenix defenses because he's got great clear that can be over a wall that clears the wave instantly. And Mike on this RDO, who's really lost his Magi's over and over again to tail whips from Jake, that's not going to happen underneath the Phoenixes. The Bolt's strength comes from how quickly they can get things done. They've got great front lining. They've got a Frenzy that's upgraded for Jake, and they haven't been they've been really excellent on all-in committing at the right times. I'd anticipate that's what we're about to see, a well-timed all-in commit.
Dragons not quite in position for the defense's Frenzy comes out from Jake. That's the go button for the Bolts, and Panda Cat the target, but those crits are ringing true onto Haddix for the right side. Phoenix already removed, so in comes Fine OK, getting right in the thick of it, forced to retreat as he takes quite a bit of damage himself, and that is clean from the Bolts. Aggression is well timed, the Phoenix goes down quickly, and they retreat on the back without giving up any casualties. The Bolts are primed now to take a game off the Dragons.
Right on the precipice, just need another Phoenix or two or just one fight to go their way. Starting to see the damage come through from Panda, as you highlighted. Heroin was able to survive a little bit longer that fight, and Fine OK still got melted. He's still only level 18, so he definitely needs to get some farm before this Fire Giant spawns. I wonder if the Dragons are going to defend it, because it wasn't the left side Phoenix or mid Phoenix, it is the right side Phoenix that fell there that the Bolts took down, and that means that this is a much easier defense for the Dragons on Fire. They can keep pushing waves from underneath blue buff while still staying local enough to fight on FG.
Wow, a Spectral for Lasbra as well as that final item. I mean, this Circuit build is more on the tanky side. Void Shield on Keeley. Spectral now finishes it out. A bit more of a bruiser path for him as the Bolts grab the Pyromancer and are in position for this FG, and this will be the answer to your question. Just to what extent are the Dragons willing to contest? And Sam on a ward. I don't know that he's aware. There's the blink in from Vin, but Sam able to narrowly escape. I think if he didn't have the data, he certainly had the sense that he couldn't afford to step much further forward than that. Just gets a bit of information, hightails it out of there, as the FG now not too far from spawning, and all signs saying that the Dragons don't really want to come out and contest.
Interesting to me that Barra isn't putting pressure on the left-hand side and just trying to get some leverage out of that ultimate. He's still been willing to group and then use that ultimate more as a chase down tool in these team fights. Doesn't want to get picked off, but it does mean that the Bolts are all in on this strategy. They aren't splitting the map. They're just saying, you got to come meet us at fire, and the Dragons will not. They declined the invitation. They're going to try their hand at another Phoenix defense.
But the Dragons have passed those key milestones in terms of experience. Level 20s and then 17 for the support, which is that same mark. So if they have the gold, those upgraded starters are an item. Pendulum of Age is there, Compassion for Mike. Looks like Final K still not quite with the capital to upgrade his Bluestone, but finishing Spectral still a pretty key landmark for him. So even though they couldn't contest the FG, some big moments passed for the Dragons, and now the biggest moment of all, can they defend? It's not enhanced, just a regular Fire Giant around the waist of the Bolts. And it looks like the Dragons are going to take this opportunity to push up that right side wave, so they shouldn't have to worry too much about it. They'll buy themselves a little bit of time to focus completely on a Phoenix defense.
The last Phoenix defense didn't go so well for them, though. It was Haddix who broke it very quickly by blinking in onto both backliners. But in that fight, Hurwind wasn't there right away. He backed a little bit late. And I think we might have a similar situation here as Lazarus keeping too busy on the right.
Yeah, they just have not yet been all in position. Hurwind getting completely handled by Haddix. It opens up for the Bolts to just step right on in and melt the left side Phoenix completely. The Dragons have not really shown us that they're really ready just yet for Phoenix defense. I don't know if this is calculated, if they feel like they can't take one, and they'll farm as much as they can, but either way, the result clear. They have not been there to show up a Phoenix defense at all.
Don't think it's been intentional. I think it's been a little bit of mistiming on both. Getting blue buff for Sam is just not that critical. Maybe they both needed the gold to upgrade their starters, but I don't think so. I think that was just the Dragons being out of position.
Looks like they should be here for this mid-Phoenix, but at this point, Lasbrook can just walk around and threaten. Haddix could too, if he wasn't tanky enough and Chad enough to just walk straight down Main Street, right through the Phoenix and say hello to anyone who dares contest. It's Sam trying to keep Lasbrook out and right, but Lasbrook just outright winning the battle as Sam trades beads and is still low. Meanwhile, mid-Phoenix being threatened as well. Hurwin low, Panda Cat low, and forced to retreat. So Lasbrook moves in for fine okay. All three Phoenixes cut down, but the right side respawns just in time for the Dragons to have one more place to plant their feet, but plant their feet they can't as fine okay moves in, jostles around Haddix a bit, who shrugs it off easily. And now a chance for the right side Phoenix to go down, the base completely exposed.
Every relic still up except for Jake's on the side of the Bolt, and the Blinks, of course, from Lasbra and from Haddix. And they could wait around on Lasbra's ultimate to come up, because look at this pressure that the Jade Dragons are about to be under from the left-hand side. 2 waves of fire minions are about to come into the base.
This has been a good one from the Bolts. Can they clean this up? Can they sign on the dotted line and submit a game win here over the Dragons? Minions now pouring into the Titan. Lasbra has a path underneath to go right to Hurwind if he wants it, but still being patient. The Bolts now move in. Haddix with a blink, and he knows the target is to get towards Panda Cat. Right side Phoenix deleted, but the Jade Dragon still holding on hope as the Titan comes down to half HP. Panda Cat forced to airstrike away. Onto the Titan now goes Lasbra and Venenu with a chance to finally strike at the core of this Dragons team, and the Bolts get it done, taking a game off the Jade Dragons.
First team to do it here in Season 8, and they made it look good, didn't they, Finch? I mean, they had that game in the bag from early on, and that time they held tight. They didn't let anything get in their way. Jade Dragons still same problem they have last year, where they sometimes they get behind and they don't give enough respect to the opponents. They keep going with these aggressive plays. A couple of selective deaths there from Final K and from Mike, I think, were really, really critical. But this Kukulkan pick has not impressed me from Hurwind. I know it's in his wheelhouse, but Haddix has been able to handle that very, very easily. The Willis did not work out well for Sam at all in that game. I feel like Panda was really the only one who got to do anything of value there in game number 2.
And it's good to see Lasbrook getting so involved, right? I think that Soket is making him look real, real comfortable in that jungle role. Great, huge win there for the Bolts. Kind of hard to overstate it, but the job not done yet. I don't think this team came here for moral victories. They want a victory, and we'll see if they can get it on the backside of this break.
suspicious.
SMITE fans, Aggro here. Look, every single year, the SPL just keeps getting better. Season 7 was incredible, and in Season 8, I'm sure our players are going to take their game to the next level. But in order to do that, they're going to need the best gear they can get their hands on. And that's why I'm so excited to announce the title sponsor for Season 8 of the SPL is Alienware. Yeah, that Alienware. Our players are getting the best of the best in computer gaming. These Alienware Aurora Ryzen Edition PC setups are insane. Not only will these be the PCs that the players will compete on once we are in studio, but Alienware is also providing one for each player at their home setup to make sure their practice is as good as possible. Now let's get down to brass tacks. The specs on these Alienware Aurora Ryzen Edition desktops are amazing. An AMD Ryzen 9 16-core processor.
That's a lot of cores.
That's plenty of processing power.
That's a lot of plenty of cores.
If you want to stream, this is the way to go.
I know a lot about my cores, so. I mean, Pilates, right?
64 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM.
What? Is that true?
That is true.
I mean, this thing has 64 gigs of DDR4 RAM.
Which you can do literally anything with.
Literally anything.
I've never had more than 16 gigs.
That's quadruple the amount I have at home.
And one of the hottest commodities in the PC world, an NVIDIA GeForce 3090 graphics card.
Insane how much better this is than what I have.
The best graphics you really need, Ultra, of course.
Content's gonna look good.
And what's the point of all the power if you can't see it? Players will also be using the Alienware 25-inch 240 Hz monitors.
Man, when I load into scrims with this bad boy, I'm gonna feed so hard. And it's gonna be in perfect picture quality.
We are so excited to be partnering with Alienware for Season 8 of the SMITE Pro League. And the best part is, this VIP treatment, it's not just for the pros. You too can get the best possible SMITE experience. Just go to smitegame.com/Alienware and use code SMITEAW to get special discounts on some of Alienware's best products. Thanks again to Alienware. Make sure you're following them on Twitter and Instagram. That's at Alienware on both platforms. And you can join their community at alienwarearena.com.
And you're telling me an alien wore this?
Well, I just don't know, Mifflin, if I can do it better than Aggro did in the video. Again, smitegame.com/Alienware, code SMITEAW for your own special discounts. Thanks again to Alienware for partnering with us for the SMITE Pro League here in Season 8. Make sure that you check out their products, not just on their website, but also give them a follow on Twitter and Instagram at Alienware and join their global community at alienwarearena.com for giveaways and more. And you could probably, while you're there, check out the PCs that these guys are playing on, the monitors these guys are playing on. Look, when we walked into the studio, there was a significant amount of time that they were lining the walls. It was really fun. But Mifflin, holy crap, man! What? The Bolts come through. They're the first team to beat out the Dragons, and they do not look sloppy at all. It's not like that was just a narrow victory. They damn near control that game from minute one. I mean, there is not a single moment in there where we're starting, like maybe at the beginning, I think there was a minute when me and you were talking about it, Hindu had jumped in, and we were like, 1,500 gold, that's not enough to beat the Dragons. And then 1,500 turned to 3,000, and then 3,000 turned into 5,000, and then 5,000 turned into 10,000. I mean, it just spiraled out of control, it feels like.
Yeah, this was a game of a death of 1,000 cuts, and I think the first cut came from Lazra. He got involved in a huge way. We were kind of down on him after game one, so you got to sing his praises when he does well. Lazra steps up for his team 4-0-7 and gets involved throughout the entire duration of this match, even getting the better end of Sanford Soccer in a couple of 1v1s. I felt like, to me, the Bolts played a very slow, methodical match. All right, we got our invades, they're working, let's just keep working through those. A couple of objectives started to roll our way, and to speak to your point of what you brought up with me and Hindu Man in the backstage, Yeah, well, 1,500 doesn't feel like a lot. 3,000 doesn't feel like a lot, but it just felt like the Jade Dragons at no point dug in their heels and said, all right, that's enough. You can't have any more. And instead, they let it slowly slip out of control, slowly, until eventually the Bolts had just established a lead that was so dominant that it felt like the Dragons really had no recourse. They couldn't defend their Phoenixes. There were a couple Phoenixes that go down with literally 0 attempted defense from the Jade Dragons, and the Bolts just come away with it cleanly, man. I mean, at no point did I feel like the Bolts were risking their lead. They just play it clinical.
I saw Adapting, I think, throw out on Twitter that he was like, it was impressive, honestly, that the Dragons were able to lose so heavily and not fall as far behind as possible for a few moments of that. But then eventually, unfortunately, the FG is what kind of made it catch up to them, the reckoning that was to become. And now they're going to swap sides, Mifflin. This is going to be the first time the Bolts are the first picks this set. I feel like I wanted to say that changes everything, but I'm not sure how much that changes. I mean, where do you go if you're trying to divide and slice up what happened with the Dragons there? Was it a picks and bans thing? Was it a play style thing? Maybe a little bit of both? I mean, where do you really start to make some changes here?
I think if anything, the Jade Dragons need to facilitate Final K. It feels like when Final K falls behind, the rest of the Jade Dragons aren't quite able to perform to their peak capacity. So if anything, let's put a little bit more emphasis play on field around that soul lane. And as far as P's and B's go, I might even be willing, if I'm the Jade Dragons, to go ahead and ban out that Circuit, because Lazarus looks so much better on that pick, is able to just close it out for his team. It elevates him as a player and the rest of his team in turn.
Well, this is an interesting change-up. Top 4 have been banned. Tiamat banned by the Dragons this time instead of the Bolts. Makes sense. The Bolts are first pick. But Fenrir jumps up from that second tier of bans to the very top. And the Dragons, instead, I mean, both times they first picked this King Arthur away from the Bolts. And this time away, they're willing to ban it from them as well. Look, this is going to sound like I'm tooting my own horn. When I chose him as a monologue topic for SBL Waiting Room, I did not actually know how much of a precedent it was going to be, but he's been very prominent today. Does let the Bolts pick up this Sobek that has been successful for them, but Mifflin, is this the kind of adjustment you wanted to see coming down from the Dragons, or do they need to be able to scoop up some good picks alongside it?
Well, I think scooping up some big picks here would be helpful for them, and they have so much left on the table available. Yamoja still out there, Tsukiyomi incredibly strong. They get their pick of the litter with the Hunters if they want to move there immediately as well. So I think that if anything, the Jade Dragons should come away with something pretty strong. How could we forget about the hurry wind Scylla, huh? He tried to trick us in an interview earlier this week, saying that maybe his Scylla is better than his Yanis. I'm not sure that I'm truthfully buying that, but certainly still very capable on this god. And then Heimdall to round out that draft, making sure they get their pick of whichever hunter they want. And that this does leave them available to go back towards that Yamoja that we saw in Game 1, because it's very unlikely that the Bolts pick up a second Guardian.
That was banned away from them there in game number 2, so we'll have to see. Sobek, Circuit, 2 S's that were very kind to the Bolts. Cullen and Chernobog were actually their top 3 alongside that Sobek, and it looks like they're going to opt for one of those 2. I didn't know if they were going to go back to Chernobog as much as I thought they were going to go for the Cullen, but it's a pleasant surprise to see this come through. The Chernobog, I think we talked about this a lot in the SCC, and then we're kind of surprised when we hit a brick wall and it wasn't happening in the SBL, but Chernobog and Apollo were like the talk of the town when we started up Season 8 competitive stuff because of their ability to rotate. Chernobog seemed to have made that translation. We haven't seen as much Apollo up here in the SBL. Do you think that's a good clapback? I mean, I feel like he could potentially have a home here for the Dragons to try and keep up with what Barrow was able to do last game.
It could work out for them, but I think that it just going for aggressive hunters is going to fit Panda Cat style so much more so. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if we see an Uller in the future or something along those lines. But for now, Heimdall going to be just fine up against Chernobog. I'm sure Panda Cat's feeling that as the 1v1 potential as Nike gets locked in. That is likely headed over into the Soul lane, could potentially flex in the jungle, more than likely headed to solo. And if Final K feels like they're going to put pressure in his lane, nothing better than a second HP bar to make sure he's able to stay alive.
Now, this does bring up an interesting conversation. We've been kind of dancing around it, but Tuesday is when that big nerf to the Shell comes through, the Shell upgrade very specifically, right? You had mentioned Yamoja, she's going to get banned away here. Nike, though, admittedly, you have to assume Sobek, maybe one other, depending on the composition here for the Dragons, are going to be able to pick up that shell. They're going to want to upgrade it. But Sunder still exists in the game, Mifflin, and Sunder was the big thing that kind of caused the fall of Nike the first time around last year. And it's still going to be around this time around. Do you think even banning the Kukulkan, potentially banning another solo laner here, no going for a mid laner there? I mean, do you think... I trust FineOK to play anything, but is this Nike going to feel safe, even though like it's meant to be the safe pick, but does it actually do it?
It's going to take big rotations for Sunder to come into play for Nike in the early game, right? You got to imagine it's going to be a 3-man gank over in the Soul lane, which would have been just a 2-man gank like it was in Game 2. So if Sunder does get picked up to counter out this Nike in the early game, it's going to create openings elsewhere on the map. Maybe it's just that answer of, all right, look, I'm going to put this bait out there. If they want to rotate over, if they want to shut me down, sure, but you have to bring numbers, and maybe my boys pick up a Gold Fury while you're working at it. So I think that there is certainly the counter argument of late game Sunder is just going to decimate Nike. There's no way to work around it. Once they're all grouped up 5-on-5, Sunder obviously going to be a huge tool to deal with FineOK. But for now, I think that it should be able to work out for them. And I think it's kind of mirrored a little bit in the rest of their draft. Heimdall is going to be able to shred objectives pretty easily. Susano is going to be able to help out with the confirm, as will I'm a Monster from Scylla. So if there is a commitment onto the solo side, the Jade Dragons should be able to play around the objectives.
Well, Guan Yu locked in right after Susano on the other side there. So the Bolts picking up their solo laner. Susano, something we've seen Sam play. We'll probably have plenty of time to break that down. Guan Yu plus the Merlin. Look, I go back and I look at the team from literally Game 2. Chernobog, Sobek, Serket, Merlin. Wow, 4/5 of it are the exact same. Kukulkan for Guan Yu. I guess this is going to be the softball for you since not much has changed. Does Guan Yu slot into this team better, the same, a little worse than Kukulkan? Like, how does that change affect the Bolts?
It's not the exact same level of space creation that we saw on Kukulkan. Haddix isn't going to be able to blink in and then knock up 3 people, turn into a giant rage machine, and then zone them for a little bit longer. Instead, it's going to be a little bit more one-note in terms of engage. Cavalry Charge going to be the main tool to close the gap for this Guan Yu, and then I imagine we'll see him fall back to rejoin his team and utilize that healing. So maybe a slight loss of space creation made up for in better dances around objectives, whereas the Jade Dragons, rounding out their draft with Cerberus, should be able to deal with some of that healing a little bit. That Tainted Steel start could come through if they so elect, and then just immediately try and sit on this Guan Yu and shut him down throughout the early. I like this Cerberus pick a lot, and I think it is more than likely headed to support.
Yeah, the Cerberus, Susano, I mean, Nike, Heimdall, Scylla, at least 2-3 of those. I'll give it to the Susano because he's come through and been successful for them in the past. Nike, Cerberus are kind of curveballs at this point. I'm actually going to even double check to see if this is Nike's first game or if she was played at some other point. I want to say this is the first time, yeah, that she's been picked up here in this phase. So, first off, I get to cross her off my list. Yay. But also, I mean, with this team around her, you had mentioned the double health bar. If you're going to focus the lane, that's going to help out. But when it comes to the team fight phase, Guan Yu brings in a lot of team play and team capabilities. Are Nike, you know, your Cerberus, your Susano going to be able to keep up with what we just saw out of the Bolts there for, you know, your Serkets, your Sobeks, and your Guan Yus?
Susano's going to be able to get involved the second he ticks over to level 5, should be able to match the output and be able to out-rotate a Serket throughout the early game, and then late game, going to bring a little bit more so to the team fight, but Guan Yu's healing is nothing to scoff at. But Gore, I gotta zoom out even a little bit further here. I've been looking at this draft for a couple more seconds now. There is the potential that we see Nike head over into the support role. Could be that he heads over there, then Cerberus gets the decent counter matchup into Guan Yu with that anti-heal. But if you do send Nike over to support, if PBM is going to be the pilot of this god, it means that Sunder is going to be a much better selection. It's going to be much easier to apply it throughout this match. Maybe does just dissuade the Bolts from picking up Sunder early on because shutting down a support, not nearly as valuable as shutting down a soul laner. It's interesting. It's got me guessing. I think the Jade Dragons have done a good job of keeping their draft slightly ambiguous here.
Well, that's a good call from them, being able to keep things even slightly ambiguous is an advantage they need at this point. I mean, game number 2, was very solid for the Bolts. I'd be honestly a little worried about dealing with it. And I also think no matter what happens this game, Mifflin, I can at least personally say the Bolts have done what I set out to see them do today. And that's, I mean, they made the impossible happen. They made the Giants at the top of the league bleed at least a little bit to showcase that they are able to kind of hang out up here. They have one more game. The Bolts are in a position, I mean, they run back 80% of the same comp that did it well the first time around. They are in a good spot to potentially try and win this set and answer the question definitively whether or not they can hang with the top 4 as well as they hang with the bottom 4. But the Jade Dragons, I mean, with a lot of changes, make a bounce back. This is going to be a fight for the ages. Let's see who can win it in Game 3.
Thank you on the desk, Goremizer and Mifflin. Finch and Aggro here is this Game 3 forced out by the Bolts. And we'll see how the Dragons respond to their first bit of strife here in Season 8. And I think it worth noting this Nike was something they talked about a lot. And would it be going to Final K or Mike? And then if it does go to Final K, how does this Nike deal with the Sunder that is almost certainly coming out? And it's in Jake's hands and can break through that shield. But I think this was a similar case in Season 7, and we still saw Final K bring this pick out from time to time. He did not let himself get deterred. Do you think he has a chance to still be impactful on it here?
He does. I'm just surprised by the pick, Finch, because they could have picked Cucullin in that slot. They pick it right
He's
before the second ban phase. They pick Nike ban Cucullin away from Haddix. I don't know. I'm surprised. I would have certainly expected that to go the other way, but overall, I think the Nike can still be solid. It's very difficult for a character like Merlin to deal with. If Jake wastes that Sunder elsewhere or misses it or isn't there, this Nike really gets to have a field day with Merlin. No way for you to get away from Nike on that character.
No, not with that slow. That's egregious. It's so difficult to deal with. The Dragons, though, I think got to make sure their focus is on this early game to some extent, because that was where the Bolts really got away with things in this game, and then it put them in a position where it seemed like they felt they had to go for some riskier plays, some hero plays, and the Bolts were certainly ready to defend it. And I think Herwin being on this Scylla is pretty big as well. Give him a chance in what he considers that secondary pick. Even said in an interview he thinks it might be better than his Giannis. A real chance to prove it as Herwin in some trouble, maybe not seeing it there, but he held on to the beads, so my man remained confident.
Yeah, no fear in that man. He'll take the L on the damage, but doesn't want to lose the purification beads because that feels like a more certain death. Lasber right on time, going to come in and deal some damage, but with Venenu in tow, that ends up being better. But look at Final K's rotation.
He's made his way in, and Lasber now in trouble. Crush comes over the wall, but Deathbane providing an opportunity for Lasber to still retreat. And that's the additional strength of this Serket, which gave Lasber such sort of malleable ways to get aggressive in Game 1. Also gives you a ton of ways in which to escape.
He looked great on it. He has those games, man, where he looks really, really good. It just, you look at the difference between Game 1 and Game 2 and his effectiveness, and you really can't get further apart from one another. So, and that's been the problem with Lasbra during his career, is that he has these such great moments where you think he's ready to take that next step, then he's not able to do it right away. Over here, comes over, has an effective gank, gets the beads, straight to blue buff. Perfect, doesn't waste any time, got what he wanted, and now he's opened up a window for himself in just a couple of levels to come back over and make another impact.
And it was well timed because Sam took a back during that window, picked up his full warrior Tabi. Looks like Lansborough delayed that a little longer to set up for that gank and to make life much easier for Haddix. If he's able to find a stun off the back of his ult or something like that, Haddix would be in trouble. But Sam, now here in right, helps the blue and leaves. Meanwhile, PandaCat pulled in. He's on Heimdall. Does make it into the Bifrost just in the nick of time. No HP, but holds on to the beads. Very surprised with the way these backliners have been patient, almost obstinate with these relics.
Yeah, you want to talk about knowing your limits, I suppose. Both Hurry and Panda very knowingly walked into that situation. He knew he was going to get plucked. He knew he was going to get CC chained. He doesn't place down the portal too early. Waits until he gets tail whipped, then places it down, knocks everybody back, and happily teleports away with his wave that was previously getting zoned. So ends up in a much better position where with the wave positioning, and ends up getting that XP and gold all by himself, where Beraz had to split it.
Barracuda might have to use beads. No, great initial reaction with the ultimate. He'll drop down next to Mike elsewhere, which so far Mike's proving might not have been all that comfortable. Jukes a couple autos and gets Barracuda down to half, but no chance for further aggression on the back of it. So good work from Barra to use that ultimate in place of beads, buy himself some safety and a chance to get off that first back so that he can finish off his Devourer's Gauntlet, exactly what he does. This Jade Dragons team had to show us they can be even more proactive than that, because the Olympus bolts in that power vacuum got aggressive in game one. It really put the Jade Dragons to the test as Haddix really getting bold at this point, just walking in, taking a harpy in the face of Mike and Sam, and now leaving casually, even with FineOK rotating in, even walking back in aggressively, choosing not to take the safer pathing on purpose, and enjoying the mental damage that might accrue.
Yeah, a lot of abilities being fired off on both sides and not always landing for each side, but love the aggressiveness so far, and it's worked out better for the Bolts up until this point at the very least.
Now a chance to get aggressive. FineOK drops the shield and it just gets deleted. First blood goes to Lasbra again, but Sam, a chance to turn things around and maybe even find a second kill, but he's so low on mana, might not be able to keep this up onto Haddix, who uses the slow from that dash to peel off of Sam and at least keep things 1-for-1 solo for jungle. But now Mike with a chance to find the stun into the ghastly breath, but still doesn't have quite enough damage. Now Mike certainly gonna die for this trade. Yes, he gets Haddix, but gives up his life support for solo to make sure they put Haddix down.
Man, he must have gotten hit by the frame one of an auto attack from Haddix. I didn't see Haddix deal any damage to him. I thought he was just gonna die to tower, as Jake thought Sam was all out of mana. Turns out he wasn't, and ends up just not getting a whole lot of value out of that lurking in the waters. But with those blink paralyzing spits where that's an open court move right there from PBM. You know, he's only got one man to beat in that moment, and he makes it happen with a great freehand shot, and that's still worth his time. Is Barra even coming over to help out Lasbra, who blinked in onto Sam, but Sam once again escapes.
All right, so this is why Mike locks in Cerberus all the time, is because he's just not going to miss the paralyzing spit. Barra now suddenly in an awful position. Knock up and now I'm a monster, and Barracuda ends up punished for the aggressive use of the ultimate. Wanted to back up Lasbra, who was bullying out Sam successfully, but ends up paying the price with his life. And the last thing you want to do is give Panda Cat more room to breathe in left. Looks like Venenu rotated over to left to clean up that wave to set up for Barra to make that rotation, so that is good. Prevents the tower pressure and gets some farm for Ven, but still maybe a bit too aggressive there from Barra.
Definitely a bit too aggressive, but it's not the end of the world. You still get your farm picked up on this left-hand side. You haven't lost your purple yet, though you're about to with this many people here in local. No way Venenu's going to be able to steal that one away. So secured, you lose a couple waves and your purple, but at least the waves didn't go to waste.
Block lands onto Sam, pulls him back towards Venenu, who does get knocked up. Mike also controlling Jake with the Stygian Torment. As Barracuda trying to get back involved for a moment, I thought they'd flat out switched lanes, because it looks like Barracuda went to mid initially, but they're back to their homes where they belong as Haddix looks for aggression onto FineOK. Yet again goes knock up immune. That Talu Assault and able to back up. And FineOK low has been struggling in this matchup so far. But I don't know if this Nike into Guan Yu matchup is so she can bully him in lane. They like her potential to cause problems for Van and Barracuda in the late.
But when you have the option of picking something like a Cullen, which can do both, and you've looked so good on, that's why I'm so surprised that this is the way it's gone. But you know, I'm interested to hear their thoughts afterwards, one way or another, about this Nike pick, because on paper you think it's easy, but of course. Finds not picking it because he just felt like it. You know, I'm sure he has his reasoning. And I think that it can be impactful come late game. It handles this Chernobog pretty well. When he dashes into the wall and he goes to dash out, you just have that Nike shield right in front of him, and he just gets instantly canceled out of it and pushed back into the wall right away. That can be hard for him to deal with, and that's usually the way that Chernobogs stay alive so long in the team fights, is by using that survivability. Nike's one of the few characters who can actually shut it down.
Couple of secondary items getting finished. Crusher for Sam, Charons for Ven, Jotuns for Lasbra, and Stone of Binding for Mike. Something that he really likes to pick up on this Cerberus that can really set up for a quick single target pick. He sews off some of the damage there onto Jake, and if he had any follow-up, Jake would be a lot more vulnerable than he might have thought. But on the way for potential purple buff invade are the Dragons. Sam, Panda Cat, and Mike all here. Herwind on the way. But it looks like the Bolt will respond with 4 of their own in kind. And should be enough for them to still defend this purple buff in the end anyway. Yes, looks like that will be the case. Dragons do rotate over there, but the Bolts do their job. Bring 4 members in and defend. Gonna make it hard for the Dragons to get their usual normal early game lead if the Bolts keep playing this well.
And they're playing really, really nicely at this point, in really good rotation from Haddix. Good call from the Jade Dragons that this is not someone that you can fight right now. Haddix, probably the strongest player on the map at this point in his build, just has that cooldown. No one's going to have the damage to one-shot him. It's going to be very, very difficult to handle his sustain that he's bringing to the team and his damage. So no reason to pick a fight where Haddix could be there at all. If I'm the Jade Dragons, I'm trying to steer clear of this Guan Yu for the foreseeable future.
Lazarus found Sam in the jungle again, and so far Lazarus winning it. One more auto does it. Leaps back in, still can't find it, and Sam ends up falling to Jake. I think that damage might have been needed, hard to say, but the first kill goes to the Bolt. I'm a Monster seems to connect, but it's Mike in trouble, and again, the Bolts have the Jade Dragon seemingly outclassed in this early game. A better rotation there first, and they put down jungle and support.
And it's just smart fight selection by the Bolts. Exactly what I'm saying. You don't want to take a fight anywhere near Haddix. They force it, but now Barracuda nearly gets soloed by Panda Cat. Close, but no cigar for the Jade Dragon's Hunter. I was going to say, he's not going to let Barra back at that point, man. He's got to hold him there, especially with Herwind lurking. Yeah. I thought he was going to try and dive him underneath the Tier 1 and Tier 2 in between, but ends up not being the case.
Yeah, Herwind can't quite get there. Barracuda gets the back off, and that just becomes a flat-out win for the Olympus Bolts on the back of great pressure on the right side of the map. And Sam seemingly cannot stand up to Lasper in the jungle with this blink start. The Cobra's Kiss, Deathbane, Last Breath, that's all just connecting. He has no way onto the CC chain, and Lasper seems very much aware of it. Anytime he can catch Sam, and he's looking for Sam in the jungle, moving up onto the Chaos side of the map, he's taking that 1v1, and Sam struggling to handle it.
Eventually, Sam will get the upper hand based on just the God selection alone. He's going to get Purification Beads. Susano scales much better into the later stages than something like the Circuit, and I'd assume Sam is going to be able to win those 1v1s once he gets a couple items online. But for now, Lazarus doing exactly what he should be doing. Playing aggressive, getting in his face, keeping pressure on his relics, almost soloed him entirely. Just needed a little tiny bit of help from Jake. And even with a little bit of extra power from that round shield, that might have been enough to get the kill on his own last time. So don't be surprised if Sam's right side jungle is still under siege. Any fight that Haddix can be a part of is going to be looking pretty good for the Bolts.
And don't you feel like the Bolts are going right for what we consider the strengths of this Dragons team? Listen, there are no weak links on this squad, but to go right to Fine OK is part of the map, to go right to Sam in the early game is bold from inception, and it's been working for them to deliberately try and slow down what is often a strength of the Dragons, this right side of the map. And Fine OK even selecting a pick that makes it harder for him to fight into that right side aggression. The Bolts seem to have not just that top-down view of how to get aggressive, but go right to the core of what makes this Dragons team strong as the Greater Scorpion goes to the Bolts. And that Fury now only about a minute away from spawning in for the first time.
You've got the Merlin, you've got the Guan Yu, you've got a ton of prot shred on this objective in order to get it done quickly. Still don't have the secure, and it was the same situation in Game 2, so the Bolts really just made sure that they were pulling objectives at intelligent times, not pulling it in front of the secure mage on the other end. Herwin's pretty far behind in this game. Wow. Vinany level 14, Herwin level 12. Not going to be as threatening on that objective secure as he would be if he were at the same level as Vinany.
And Agro, talk to me about how much this factors in. Those first couple of weeks, I don't know if it was just, maybe being a bit stubborn, but teams were not banning away Herwin's Giannis initially those first couple of weeks. Now, with Herwin now more consistently being relegated away from the pick and trying to find these other options, he has struggled a bit in this mid game. Listen, his Scylla is strong, I know, but feels like kind of just saying flat out, fine, we'll ban that Giannis first overall, has limited his impact a bit.
Well, of course. I mean, he's the best player in the world at that god, so taking it away from him on such a dynamic pick makes a lot of sense. I think Hurwin's struggles today have been more attributed, in my mind, to how weak the front line has been in comparison to what we normally see from the Dragons. Mike, Fine, and Sam have been way less effective.
Frenzy pop. This is an all-in commit from the Bolts, and no one here to stop it. Bolts grab the Fury at the beginning of this game. FineOK already dropped that Sentinel Zeus, and they are done with the fight. The Jade Dragons hanging back in the wings, and the Bolts grabbing the objective, hightailing it out of there for free, with no one even considering a chase. This is a different look at the Jade Dragons. The Bolts are giving us, and remember what Sam said coming into this, they thought Leviathans and the Kings were more of a threat, but I don't think the Bolts agree. They consider themselves Kingslayers here in game number 3.
They've looked phenomenal, man. It's such a good timing for everything that they're doing. They really are playing the map so well. Hurwin backs, straight to Gold Fury. Let's pop Frenzy, let's do it. Not only are they doing it on a back timing from the secure mage that they have to worry about, but also on a level 12 power spike that Mike hasn't met yet.
He's not ready, and Lasbra has him locked down with 4 members of the squad on the way over the wall with the ambush. Good stun into Barracuda buys Mike time, but it is only time and little else as Deathbane cuts him down for his 3rd death of the game. And that speaks to your point that maybe the real struggles for Hurwin are that FineOK and Mike, who are normally pillars, normally our best frontline duo in the league, uncontested, have struggled mightily in this one. It's on the back of great play from Lasbra in Game 2 and Game 3, consistently pressuring them out and making life hard for those frontliners.
These last 2 games, there's no doubt which frontline has been better, and it's been Haddix and Jake versus FineOK and Mike. I mean, it's been the Bolts frontline for sure. Haddix has looked so dominant on that Cucullin and now really controlling the tempo of this game nicely on the Squan U. But you're right to point out Lasbra as well. He's really been the one facilitating these leads for the Bolts and making sure that they get into these positions. 3,000 gold at 16 minutes is by no means a death sentence. No way. But you're feeling the momentum certainly be more on the Bolt side, even more so than at points in Game 2, where it felt like, okay, you know, the Dragons are losing, but they're going to make a comeback at some point. You know, they're going to find an opening at some point. And then when the Bolts play so clean from minute 1 all the way until the end of the game, it makes this lead feel more tangible, I think, than it did in Game 2.
I agree. I think the context of this set important when we're looking at it. Pyromancer goes to the Bolts. Hurwin commits I'm a Monster to try and steal it over the wall a little too late with that damage for a successful steal. So yet one more objective that goes to the Bolts, and that lead that we were thinking more about 3K, it's looking more like a little over 4 at this point for the Bolts. They are increasingly and steadily moving out of reach of the Jade Dragons. They're doing it really without a ton of resistance across the map with, like you said, the timings of these plays they're going for. And it seems like sometimes the Dragons are too late and too little when they do show up. The Bolts moving with a confidence that we only saw from them at Worlds last year, and we kept saying if they can do that more consistently, maybe this team really will be a threat to the very top of the SPL, and this is them showing us an ability to do that more consistently and showing us they can be the threat.
Just about doing it all the time, and certainly they've come in hungry for this set. You can tell that they really wanted to win this one. That's the problem with being the de facto best team in the league, is that every team's gonna come in and really try and give you their all. You got a target on your back at all times for the Jade Dragons, and at this point the Bolts have delivered on what they came here to do. But now they're in a position where it's time to start thinking about how we close out this game. Where do we look next? What are we going to do in order to try and keep the pace of this game up? We got Gold Fury, great. Then we went and got Pyromancer, great. Now we're waiting around a little bit. Not a lot of buff invades, just playing it nice and slow, trying to play around these objectives, which again can favor them with the burn of the upgraded Frenzy and the Merlin, but it can also be an Achilles heel with a lack of secure. That's one of the easiest ways for the Jade Dragons to get back in this one, is to lose or to steal an objective away from the Bolts.
Stripping away an FG Even a Gold Fury could be that window, but the Bolts have done such a good job of being so early to the objective and burning it so quickly. The Jade Dragons are really going to have to be on the information side of things if they want to keep up. And now the Bolts just looking for picks. Mike pulled in and does not have the purification beads. Meanwhile, Lasbra ganked over in solo. Up into I'm a Monster goes Herwin, and Lasbra avoids getting knocked up by the Typhoon. Has to drop beads to make that happen. Meanwhile, Herwin and Mike both make it out of there, and Hurry never once drops a relic to get it done. Beads do come out from Sam in this process, as well as Lasbra, but the Bolts are just going to group up, take this mid-tier 1 if no one in position to stop them, and it looks like no one is. That helps the map control in this point too, and looks like they might just be heading right over to Fury, even without Lasbra present. That time, that fight from them, done in the 4v3 without their jungler. They will pop the Frenzy, they will burn the Oni Fury. Panda Cat getting close, but not gonna make it in time. The Bolts get another objective on the back of a good fight and can't get really anything in trade.
The Dragons just have to be able to convert on that kill on Lasbra on the right-hand side, but he has good pathing decisions, goes high instead of low, and ends up being able to get out of there and trade beads for beads up against Sam for Soccer. As soon as that trade went poorly, the Bolts know that they've got such a great advantage because they're 4v3 in mid and on the left-hand side, so they push it perfectly. They get tier 1 tower, they play it nice and slow, they know that Herwin's going to have to back, they know that Sam's going to have to back, and then they go straight to the Oni Fury and use that Frenzy. Love the way that they've been playing, man. Their macro shot calling has been really, really clean so far.
It's impressive, man. It's not what I would have expected coming into this set, but boy, am I excited to see it. I know there's only 8 kills on the board, but I think you'd have to be pretty blind to the context here to not understand how this is an impressive game from the Bolts, how this is a huge game to be watching happen here in the moment. And just look at that gold curve up, not entirely smooth, but an impressive one nonetheless, where they have just been steadily finding ways to get out of reach here of the Jade Dragons. It has been the Dragons chasing them the entire game. That is so rare to see happening to this team, for them to be the ones reacting, for them to be the ones on the back foot at all, looking to counterpunch when they're normally the ones out in front. That alone seems to have been kind of taking away a lot of the Jade Dragons' luster, a lot of their shine, is just simply being the team that's proactive and forcing the Dragons to find a way to react properly. They've kept this close. This isn't beyond the possible for them, but it's certainly a high advantage state for the Bolts. They'd had to make some mistakes for the Dragon to get back in, and looks like they want to try a risky play, at least considering it as Jake stays on it, but a back from Haddix makes me think they're not all in committing. Barra not looking to ult in. They'll drop the FG, and now the Dragons have a chance to move in and get good positioning as Mike moves in first. Plucked. There comes Sam with the Typhoon, knocks up Venenu, and gets the Aegis out of him early. And Venenu low. Fine-OK finds that first kill, but Jake reacts with a kill onto Sam. And now it's Barracuda's time to make it in. Herwin low. Dashes in, but gets plucked kind of back towards safety. No, Lasbra lying in wait, cleans up the kill with the Cobra's Kiss. A critical one for Lasbra to have found.
Man, Hurry so greedy with the relics, doesn't use either of them on that play and gets punished for it. Ved, on the other hand, uses his relics pretty well and ends up doing exactly his job. Get all your damage off. That's your only job in that moment, and he did that perfectly. Dumped it all at his feet, and both Sam, Mike, and Sam, Mike, and Fine, rather, end up taking a ton of damage on the back end. Panda Cat was still farming the left-hand side. Can't match the rotation, of course, from the Chernobog for Barracuda, so he's able to get straight on the back line. Herwin left a little bit too far isolated, and he got a lot of damage off on that I'm a Monster, then dashed in, which was great instincts. I think that was the only way that he ends up making a play from that position, is the dash in, but instead of using the beads or the Aegis when he gets plucked, ends up just getting tossed straight to Lasbra, who kills him with the Cobra's Kiss.
Another clean fight from the Bolts, and that time I think we're seeing the strength of this Chernobog, which I couldn't believe had been starting to see less value from these players. Those global ults are certainly still strong, and Barracuda proves it by kind of just being an extra man. Panda Cat has zero impact on how that fight goes, and really in the 000 and his KDA has had zero impact on the game in general. Now a chance, though, with him over here to be involved in these fights from the beginning, but now they're down 8,000 gold. Now Barracuda has an entire Deathbringer on him, which is monumental in terms of the DPS output. Yes, he's here, but is it too little too late as the fire in the sights of the Olympus Bolts already? Haddix the first one on it. and the DPS beginning. The Dragons are close, and Heroin has I'm a Monster as Jake moves up for the zone, and Jake getting burned quite quickly. Haddix taking damage too as I'm a Monster comes through, and Panda Cat gets the first pick onto Haddix, who said FG. Might be a way for the Bolts to give a Dragons the way back in, and I saw it there.
Blink is up on 7 seconds for Mike, but Jade Dragon's gonna head back towards the fire themselves instead.
Jake wants to come back in. He's low. Lasper on the backside, so Mike blinks in, but Barracuda shreds him instantly. Mike forced to retreat, so fine, okay. The next man in, and Panda Cat gets another kill, but on the backside, Lasper is able to do enough damage to remove Mike, and I think the poison spread to fine, okay, as Lasper gets a double. Panda Cat goes down 2, and you cannot overrate the impact that Lasper has had in this set, averting disaster for his boys and maybe even a chance to take care of Heroin too. Can't find the Cobra's Kiss, does get pulled back in, but still able to get fine okay low. Looks like he will finally fall, but he has slowed down what the Dragons could do on the back of that fight.
So look at the difference between the Fire Giant pulls that the Bolts just did and what they were doing on Gold Furies earlier. Before it was, we're going to push them out, we're going to move them around the map, and then we're going to collapse in and use our burn to our advantage. We know we can't secure, but we're going to DPS race their feet and get it done before they get here. But that time, they don't do any of the pushing out. They go straight to fire, and it's Jake who's zoning, but Jake's the one with the frenzy, so they can't DPS it fast enough. Haddix is there to sustain them, but they burst Jake, they get right past him, and then instantly the whole fight is completely whiffed out the window for the Bolts. But then a great turnaround, because then the Dragons themselves get a little greedy, head towards fire without the secure up, and Lasper comes around. Should have been on a ward there for the Dragons, but either way, still found his way into the back line, got the poison to spread onto 2 people, nearly killed 3 with the last breath alone, and end up making a great play around it. So really, really good play from both ends, and a little bit of a mistake from both ends. But the Bolts are the ones that I want to make sure are still being the initiators. We talked about it in Game 1. Sometimes they lose their appetite when things start to go a little bit poorly. It seems like they lose confidence to me. Whoever's doing their macro shot calling seems like they're losing a little bit of confidence. I want them to stay the course. They're doing a good job. They're still in a leading position from here. Just got to keep doing what they were doing well.
And it is still a strong lead. The experience not as big a factor with everyone hitting those thresholds for being able to upgrade their starters, and Fine OK's done it, as has Panda Cat. The mid 3v3 still behind, but it looks like really not behind. The Bolts haven't upgraded theirs either, so keeping in lockstep there, but a finished Rod now means that there's a Magus up that Vin has over Whirlwind with his slots finished out. Same for Lasper with that Spectral coming. And Sam still waiting on his final slot, so this is still a pretty big lead for the Bolts, and one they should feel confident using aggressively, as they do now have the positioning around the FG. But the Relic's all up for the Dragons. Still about 20 seconds before Lasper has his beads.
Still, he's got so much mobility that I wouldn't be too worried about him. These are the types of pulls that scare me, though, Finch. I mean, a little bit of a better zone this time around, but they need some help on the DPS.
But no one from the Dragons made their way in. The FG just does go to the Bolts. The zone too good. And the Dragons may be a bit worried to end up giving away too much there. Can't make their way in. The Bolts do a good job keeping them out. And that Fire Giant is huge for the Bolts now, because yes, they'd earned this lead the hard way, but with these towers going down, they can push the lead beyond the reach of the Dragons by upgrading a few more relics, getting those starter items finished off, and starting to work on that 6-slot item that the Dragons cannot quite afford to keep up with yet.
Dragons just didn't have any vision around that Fire Giant pit, but gotta have that mental timer a little bit better of what the composition is capable of. I think Venenu being up and forward is what threw off their calculations, because if both Ven and Bara are on that fire, I think the Dragons are going to be much more quick on the initiation. They're going to understand that they're running out of time more quickly. I think they're underestimating just how much damage these hunters are doing right now, man. Deathbringer done. Bara was able to absolutely eviscerate that Fire Giant with help from that Guan Yu Prot Tread.
So a soft defense from the Dragons on this tier 2. Good warding down for the Bolts, so a fine okay loops. They'll see him. He goes to mid to keep Laz from some soloing down that tier 2 with the help of the minion wave. So 4v4 on the tier 2 in duo, one-on-one. The tier 2 in mid. The Dragons can't afford to overcommit here. and give up too much on the fight afterwards, where the Phoenix might go down. Some soft defense for now, and the Bolts steadily burning it down. No one stepping up in front of those autos, and Vera will get there eventually. Now Mike comes in, blink into Stygian Torment, does get the beads out from Barracuda, but now he must fall back. That's job done. Hopefully Sam or FineOK can get some work done with that relic removed.
Has to. That's all setting the pace, setting the script for a defense on this left side Phoenix.
That's where they are. Haddock's the one tanking for now. FineOK has a chance from the side to make an engagement in, and he knows his target is the man without beads, Barracuda. Perhaps the most valuable life on the side of the Bolts at this point. He represents so much of their structure damage, but the Bolts won't get ahead of themselves. 10k gold lead for now, but they back up, clear this wave, and they'll use that to push into this mid-tier 2. But looks like the Dragon's going to do the same thing. Set up for a soft defense, see if they can get out a relic, and set up for a punish if the Bolts overcommit. Now 80 seconds before Barra's beads are back up. Into the mid-tier 2 they go. Mike the first one in the tier 2 at half. FineOK looping around the back, but still not overcommitting. The tower goes down, and the Bolts continue to steadily get everything they'd want off this FG.
Still like the way that the Dragons are playing this. No reason to lose the game defending a tier 2. Look at the builds for the Olympus Bolts. What are they going to buy with their extra gold? Upgrade the relics, some 3k pots, maybe sell the boots. That's fine. We're talking about thousands and thousands of gold worth of investment as Lasbra has found Hurry, and Hurry, a major overcommit on the relics. I mean, does not need to use all that. Beads, Alt, and Aegis all expended by Hurry, and none of it is upgraded either. That is a massive deal. And Hurry's been liable to do that a couple times during his career. Sometimes he's... And look, I think it's the better way to do it. You'd rather use too much than die with them up, but still want to have something in the back pocket. You still got to be able to have a little bit of a stronger poker face than that. Especially with Panda Cat there. Yeah, I don't know. Definitely a mistake from Hurwind, and makes their contest on the CFG significantly worse, though. His beads will be up by that time. Of course, his ultimate will be up. It'll only be that Aegis that'll have about a 10 to 15 second window by the time FG spawns. But that 10 to 15 seconds and the subsequent time before that matters a lot because of vision positioning. It's going to make it harder for the Dragons to step up and try and get vision around that Fire Giant. We saw how important that is whenever the Bolts burned it without the Jade Dragons knowing exactly what the HP was of the objective.
So Primal Fury goes to the Bolts. One more objective that'll make their life easier on the EFG. Worth noting, Sam, I believe, prioritized this Titan's Bane over Protector of the Jungle. Everyone else has those starters finished off, but he needed that key final item, so he has that burst potential to hopefully get to one of these carries in the back line. Still a minute away from Hurwind, having those beads up a little longer on the Aegis, another 20 seconds before that's back up. Try and give him additional safety. Do the Dragons in this spot have to come out and contest, though, aggro? I mean, their base defense, not bad, but at such a deficit with the EFG on the Bolts, it'll be a really tall task to keep them at bay.
I think I would defend this EFG. Enhance is just such a big deal that it really becomes difficult. Lasbra looking for Sam.
And drops that last breath. Now Sam in trouble, doesn't have Aegis. In comes the ambush, and Barracuda there with the ultimate, and Sam removed. That makes it a moot question. Do you go to EFG to defend or not? Now, down in the 4v5, I don't see how you can step up, but FineOK still does. I like the confidence still there for the Dragons, but what a pick from Lasbra and Barra to remove Sam from the equation and get his beads.
Love it. Love the aggressiveness, and it's all enabled by that Protector of the Jungle. Lasbra just has a 12% advantage on that fight. He just does more damage and takes less, and Sam can't really do anything about it.
No, and I don't think he expected that at all. Thought they'd be at fire, but Lasbra, solo agent, Mike pulled in, FG dropped. And the Bolts looking for the fight instead. Lasbra has great positioning on the backside of this fight and steps in, but FineOK forced to blink, I think, to get away from that positioning, regroups with the squad. Still gets hit by the Cobra's Kiss anyway once he steps up. So Lasbra just dropped the last breath. Bolts take the FG. Meanwhile, while all that's happening, so EFG on their side and Haddox will engage. Mike pulled back to the Wolves to be devoured by the Bolts, who will not be denied a chance to take the Jade Dragons down and find a critical victory up against a team no one else can figure out how to beat.
And now the Dragons are in a very dangerous position because all their waves are pushed up. You've got waves coming for the Bolts in just about every lane if they just play it nice and slow. You've got a 4v5 as well. Love the way the Bolts are playing. They've got themselves in prime position now in order to try and claim this victory.
Claim it is exactly what they'd like to do. A chance to knock down the Kings and take care of the undefeated record early on in the season. Mid-Phoenix stripped away, and I think the Bolts are done with formalities and done with dotting the I's and crossing the T's. Lasper moves up, ambush in, and forces Sam to blink defensively. And now an engage from the Dragons. Typhoon dropped. I'm a monster, not quite connecting, but some low health bars on the Bolts. Looks like not quite as easy to all-in engage on the Dragons as they would have liked. But Fire Giant Sustain keeps them healthy. They'll take a moment to breathe as Barracuda drops down on Sam. They knew where he is. No beads, and his life is forfeit.
Yeah, no ult for Sam either. That makes it easy pickings on that left side. So they don't end the game, but they keep on staggering the Jade Dragons. They prevent this team from farming. Looks like they're going to go for the left side Phoenix. This scares me, though, Finch, because no relics on Barracuda or on Venenu. Ultimates are on cooldown as well. Barra barely has any mana. The Jade Dragons are going to punish. This has got to be it.
Jake moves in first. Haddock right behind to keep Fine OK zone, and the Phoenix suffering all the while, but Barracuda forced to retreat. In comes Fine to try and keep them at bay, and does get good damage on the Vin, but Fine now low. Haddock's ready to make his way in, and Lasber right there alongside. Panda Cat removed. Whirlwind is right behind him, sent to the afterlife as Lasber gets his 8th kill of the game up against the Dragons, and now with a chance to take this game away, and it's rightfully theirs. The Titan down below half. It's done. Mark the calendars. May 14th, the Bolts took down the Dragons.
It seems they can bleed after all. Not quite perfect for the Jade Dragons, and the Bolts find a way to beat them, and they did it convincingly too. It's not like the Jade Dragons stumbled around and had a lead and lost it. The last 2 games, the Jade Dragons were behind from minute 1. Congratulations to the Bolts. This team is the real deal.
And so many questions about the Bolts. Is this record for real? Is it just because maybe they played some weaker teams, but there ain't a team harder to play right now than the Dragons? The Bolts get it done game 2 and 3 on the back of excellent play from that 3-man front line. Lasbra and Haddox, and great work from Jake too. And the Dragons looked, to me, aggro, a little bit lost in that one.
Yeah, I think the right side of the map just really got outplayed today for the Dragons. And you say that literally never. Like, that is never a sentence that's come out of my mouth before, I don't think. But it's credit to Lasber and Haddox. They both played really, really well. I think the Dragons came in with a little bit of a weird game plan, but, you know, it's still early in the season. This is a time to be experimenting. I think the Dragons came in maybe wanting this one a little bit less than the Bolts did, because I don't think you could have wanted it more than the Bolts did. They came with something to prove.
No. Yes, I think you hit on something. The loss means way less to the Dragons, I think, than it means to the Bolts on this one, but still got to congratulate that squad. We're going to take a quick break, be right back to break down that Bolts victory.
Welcome back, everyone, to the SPL, and your friendly reminder, even as we get back into it here, that you can tweet at us at any time at SMITE Pro and get featured on the broadcast. I'm gonna say this one maybe didn't age as well as they wanted to. Climbing in the gym, our dynasty shall reign forever. Well, today is not the day to be rocking the Dragons merch. Mifflin, I mean, look, if you watch the video that came out today on youtube.com/SmitePro, Zungle, who? I mean, get that conversation out of here. Bring it only to what the Bolts have brought to the table here and look at what has coalesced in this team. I mean, we thought they were doing well. I was going to give them a lot of credit, but the question was against the Leviathans, the Kings, the Dragons, how are you going to look? The Leviathans, that was answered a couple weeks ago. Wasn't really that great. Kings, that's later this week. Dragons, they get the win, and I have to say, if I'm giving an MVP to this set, it has to be maybe close between Jake and Lasber, but I think I have to give it to Lasber. His jungle, this Circuit, just blew me away with how much he was able to control here in Game 3.
All right, well, I got to start this off. I started this entire set by saying, if the Olympus Bolts win, I'm going to issue them an apology. I'm sorry to all the Bolts fans out there. I did not have the faith, man. I did not realize it was going to be like this, and you're right. Gore, it is Lasbra on this Circuit that was the game changer for these teams, man. I mean, he was involved from minute one. He was getting involved all over the map. It's not often that Sanford Soccer legitimately gets straight up out jungled, but Lasbra makes it look easy, and he does it consistently in both games 2 and 3.
And I got to give him a lot of credit because look, I'm not gonna sugarcoat this. There was a point in that game where the Bolts almost threw around that Fire Giant, right? They end up losing. I think Jake ends up baiting Haddix into a death, and we think Jake's gonna die. Haddix ends up falling. It's a little bit worse for Ware. Had his beads up as well, and that should have been a winning play for the Jade Dragons where things really turn around. But Lasbra goes in with ult and gets the poison spread out onto the Dragons, forces them to retreat. Again, that's the real thing that kind of stands out in my mind as to what this Circuit was able to bring. A lot of topsy-turvy play, but it's easy to highlight him when he's doing so well, but the supporting cast around him, everybody else on the Bolts just seemed to be able to go in. In their words when we did the Q&A, bolt in, bolt out. I mean, it just felt very solid for them, all on one unique page. I mean, there was even a point, look, at the Titan room and towards the end, we're like, oh no, they look like they're going to throw. Like, they are walking in here. They just got a second Phoenix, but all their health bars are precariously low. Bear's up in the air. Where is he going to go? They managed to get out of there and get a kill on Sam to boot for whatever reason he was over there. I mean, it just feels like they got maybe a sprinkling of luck with a lot of talent and a lot of hard work put behind it, right? So a lot of props here to the Bolts. And, of course, it's interesting to hear it from our perspective, but I think it's even more interesting to hear it from their perspective. We've got Venenu standing by ready for an interview.
Thanks, Gore. Vin, you got to be feeling good, man. I think in particular because these weren't two fluky wins. These were two games where for the whole time you guys were ahead and in control. What does it mean for you guys to prove you can beat who's looking like the best in the league right now?
I mean, obviously it feels great. I mean, they're the team to beat. They were undefeated the whole entire year this year so far, and yeah, we really wanted it. And we had our worst practice yesterday, so we got the badness out of us yesterday, and then we ended up winning today. So yeah, we take that, and it's just a trade-off, you know.
Well, Vin, you had a really good set, and I think you and Lasbra both really stepped up in this one. Not to imply you guys aren't normally, but I think you both looked really, really good today. Was there anything in particular that you guys thought was going to help you all coming into this one? What set you guys up to have a big game here today?
Well, game one, we were kind of practicing a little bit of like different things that we wanted to do around mid and see if we can like pick someone off like on like a chance of like a misplay. Like in game one, hi-rez stood up and then we instantly picked him and then we got a huge lead. Also, we just kind of like knew the Jade Dragon's weak point being like hi-rez, since he's kind of just like new and meshing in. And also I think there's like, I mean, once he died in the first game, like he was playing so scared, like we got to do everything we wanted to do. And yeah.
All right, well, talk to me a little bit about Haddix, kind of the new addition for this team, because he looked really good up against Fine OK over there in solo, even finding himself a solo kill. What's he meant for this roster, especially when he's able to play at the level he did today?
He fits in really well. I mean, we all enjoy playing with Haddix. I mean, he's a really good player. He's proved it in ranked a lot. He has insane mechanics. Just took a bit to mesh with the competitive and get like the little bit of jitters out. I mean, I think today should have been a 2-0 pretty easy. We all had like really good comms, but we got a little bit like nervous around the fire giant in the game 1. But yeah, I mean, everybody's been stepping it up like really, really well. We've been working really hard together in and outside of the game. So yeah, we're really happy with how we performed today, for sure.
Can you tell us a little bit about who was shot calling? Because they made some really good macro plays today. Who's doing a lot of the calls for you guys?
Late game, I guess today it was kind of Bear making quite a bit of good calls, but honestly, like all of us were making really good calls. We just have to like clean up some stuff, and yeah, everybody was really making really, really good calls. Lasber played out of his mind. Honestly, everybody played out of their mind today, and yeah, definitely some diffs going on, you know.
Well, great games from all of you guys, especially you, Van. Thanks for talking to us and giving us your honest thoughts on it. Let's get back to the desk. Have them close things out.
Have a good one.
Just good words from Venenu. They're rocking the Vin jersey as well. And hey, you know what? I gave them a shout out earlier for the Dragons. I guess it works just as well for the Bolts. Shop.smiteproleague.com. You can go ahead and pick those up if you want to. I'll throw that one in for free. That one's just on me. I think this is really, again, a good showing for it. And here's the most interesting part of this, Mifflin. So first off, when you decide to look at the standings, things are going to be a little different, right? No more goose egg over there for the Dragons in the loss column. But the Bolts are now currently on the same win streak, 4 in a row, that the Dragons were coming into today. So that either means later this week when they play the Kings, it's 4 and done. You can only get 4 in a row and you're finished. Or they'll be able to take the crown for the longest streak so far in Season 8. Of course, that's going to be a lot to remain. But honestly, 4-1, look, if you're the Bolts, you're up there next to the Dragons and the Leviathans. You are not upset with this. And honestly, Mifflin, as we look at the schedule and see where things are going, if I'm the Kings, I think I'm a little worried about Sunday. I'm scrubbing these 3 games as much as I can over the course of the next 2 days, however long I have until 1 p.m. on Sunday, because there's a lot of footage that needs to be studied for them to feel confident.
Yeah, man. Even before this set, I think you're right. Now the Kings are putting their head on just a pivot. They're trying to make sure they got Olympus Bolt in their sights, because I said it coming into the set that I felt like maybe the Bolts were going to find themselves in that 4th seed pretty solidly. Even Sanford Soccer echoes that sentiment in his interview, placed them at 4th seed as well. But taking down the Jade Dragons might shake up a lot of people's tier lists coming into next week or even into the rest of this weekend, man. The Olympus Bolts look so phenomenal, and we got to get a little bit of a look into what the comms sound like from Ben in that last interview, that energy that he brought. When everybody is playing well, when everybody is making calls and making these decisions, this team is looking like one that could be at the top of the league, man. The Olympus Bolts, so clinical in that set.
Well, Mifflin, it looks good for them again. Now, you brought up the interview, and it kind of makes me remember the we're not too worried about the Bolts thing seems to rub the wrong way nowadays. Definitely something maybe some teams are going to be taking into account over the next couple of weeks. But a really, really good day 1 here of week number 4. Of course, that is literally just day number 1. We still have 2 and 3 coming at you tomorrow and Sunday, 1 p.m. each day. Come in a little early for some SCC action at 11 a.m. if you just need that fill of Smite. But for myself, from Mifflin, from all of the casters, everyone back in production, of course, everyone here at hi-rez, and everyone in tune with the SBL. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Peach it.